The first storm of the season rolled in like a low animal, shouldering the clouds against the old ridgeline and combing rain through the cedars until the whole hillside hissed. Sylvie Caro watched the barn breathe in the wind, boards flexing, tin roof shuddering, weathered doors bowing on their strap hinges, and tried to decide whether she believed in omens or only in bad lumber. The place had belonged to her mother's people before maps were color photographs, but this was the first autumn Sylvie had ever claimed it as hers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. By the time the rain reached the valley floor, the barn smelled like hot dust shocked awake. The north post creaked as if it had a throat. The animals, just two boarding mares and a belligerent goat named Hero, shifted in their stalls with restless, hoof-tapping questions. Sylvie slid back the big door, felt the wind tug her hair like a warning, and stepped into the old nave of timber and hay dust where every sound seemed to check its own echo before committing. Her mother used to say the barn was the only church the Caros could afford. Everything important happened here. Births, deals sealed with a handclasp and a prayer neither party knew how to say aloud, secrets that outlasted bloodlines. Now it was Sylvie's, ruins and all, a gift and a dare tucked into a will written in her mother's looping, stubborn script. Fix it if you want, it had said between the lines. Walk away if you must. Either way, don't pretend it isn't yours. The floodlight she bolted to the ridge beam buzzed and steadied. Sawhorses staged under the mezzanine. The new 50-foot extension cord bright as a vein. Her day job, designing troubleshooting guides for a small manufacturer of agricultural augers, meant there was always a plan, a parts list, a torque spec for each bolt. But the barn was older than metrics, it answered to a different standard. The soft thump came just as she reached the north post. Not a beam settling. Not a harness swinging. A subterranean sound, damp-edged, like a hand closing over a mouth. Hero, she called, but the goat was busy trying to charm apples out of gravity. The maras flicked in different ears. Another thunk, then a puckered draining sound, and the packed clay between the post and the tool bench sank. An oval of dirt at her boots fell 3 inches, sighed, and kept falling in a slow spiral, as if someone were twisting a drain plug beneath the earth. Sylvie grabbed the post. The spiral widened, then slumped. She watched the barn floor perform a quiet catastrophe, a geological yawn, until the hole was the size of a washtub and then a hatch, its lip tricked with pale roots and the rusted guts of what might once have been a staple. A breath of air rose from it, cool, mineral, old enough to taste like a word she couldn't translate. She killed the floodlight and stood still. The rain drummed the roof. Hero sneezed. Nothing moved below. She crouched and let her hand hover over that breath, the way you test a skillet or a forehead. The air that touched her palm was damp and constant. Not a sinkhole, she said, because sinkholes didn't exhale and carry in their breath the faintest knife scrape of iron. She fetched her headlamp, the good one with the red diode that didn't blind you to your own periphery, and the short-handled sledge she kept for persuading old bolts to remember their purpose. She texted one person, Tamsin, whose answer to most emergencies was to appear with tea and a crowbar, and typed only, something weird under the north post. If I don't answer in 30, call. The headlamp found edges the floodlight never had. In the hole's throat, a circle of cut stone formed a collar. No soil slumped through its ring, even the rainwater diverted around it as if obeying some ancient courtesy. In the center, a plate of iron, hand-forged, stippled with hammer kisses, bolted to a timber. Not a plate, Sylvie realized as she brushed and brushed with her glove, but a lid. She brushed until the sledge felt silly in her hand. Then she set the sledge aside and used her knuckles to knock, because there are moments when you want to announce your intention even to a piece of iron. The sound was hollow, not like hard ground at all. Something below caught and threw her knock back to her, an echo with a shape to it. She found the hinge on the western arc where an iron eye looped around a rod driven through the stonework. The pin had once been peened over, but time had fretted it into 2 moons of rust. She didn't think, she reached for the old nail punch in the tool bench drawer in her small can of penetrating oil and began the slow sacrament of release. Drip, wait, tap. Drip, wait, tap. The barn's heart beat in the rain and the iron's old seam breathed. Harrow stopped being belligerent and simply watched, which Sylvie took for a clerical blessing. When the lid finally moved, it did so with the ancient politeness of something that remembered being asked. It shivered once, then lifted as if it had already been trying to all this time. Sylvie wedged the sledge handle under the lip and leaned, and the iron sighed open on a sweep of stale, cold, almost sweet air, a cellar coolness that had never met the summer she had just lived. Her headlamp peered down a throat of stone into a darkness that didn't resent being seen. The shaft was square, bricked by hand, and at 6 feet it opened like a mouth into what her light could not name. A ladder ribbed one side, oak, pegged into the brick, the rungs dark with use not rot. When she put her palm to the first rung, it felt like the muscle memory of a handshake. Someone had made this for coming and going, not for burial. She swallowed, and the swallow went all the way down. There's no good time to become someone else, her mother used to say when faced with any undertaking more ambitious than pie. But there are better times than most. Sylvie clipped a carabiner through the ladder's top rung and the back ring of her climbing harness, no faith without redundancy, then chalked her palms out of habit more than need. She considered texting Tamsin again and decided the difference between brave and foolish was sometimes only the speed of the news. The third rung flexed, and her heart did the same. The fourth took her weight like a promise. The fifth creaked in the old, contented way of oak, remembering it was still oak. The air cooled with every downward step, buffering out the rain, the goat, the entire century. By the time she reached what her lamp made into a small circle of world, the barn above sounded like something happening on the radio in another room. The square shaft opened into a tunnel that angled southwest under the barn's lawn axis. The walls were cut clay skin with the same stone collaring every 10 feet, as if whoever dug this had worried the earth might forget where it ended and try to return. Sylvie crouched and tested the floor. Packed. Dry. The oak ladder joined a series of oak ribs that arched along the ceiling, their pegs still set. She smelled iron, damp linen, a trace of lard, and something like old smoke. Not from the barn. From here. There are ways a tunnel speaks even when it's silent. The curve of the floor tells you water was not invited here. The scorch along a rib says a lantern bumped too close. A handprint, darker clay pressed into lighter, fossilized the shape of a palm, broad, with a truncated ring finger. A person who worked with their hands. A person who came back often enough to leave themselves. Sylvie started forward. The first 30 feet were the archaeology of motion, footprints like moons, the drag mark of something boxy, a groove where a rope had burned a path along the wall. At 40 feet, the tunnel passed under her tool bench, she could feel the thrum of the floodlight through the earth, and at 50, the passage narrowed around a door. Door was too grand. It was a slab of oak braced with black iron strapping, the kind of door that once corrected bad behavior simply by existing. In its face, a small hatch no larger than a dinner plate, hinged and latched, sat at eye level to a person kneeling. Someone had carved a cross into the corner, not the Christian kind but the tally mark kind, 5 scratches bundled into a cage of 5s. Next to it, a knife had taught the wood a single word, deeply and cleanly as if by a patient teacher. Stay. Her pulse did a thing that had its own grammar. She tested the latch on the small hatch first. Moving parts forgive. The latch stuck then gave, and the little square opened on a mouthful of cool dark like the rest of the tunnel but denser, as if the air had been kept for a purpose. She put her lamp to the opening and saw stone, then more stone, then the suggestion of space beyond stone. It felt like looking past a curtain without touching it. The hatch could be peered through, whispered through, maybe passed bread through. Not used by anyone eager to leave. The oak door's main latch had been pinned with a bolt drawn through and peened copiously. No key. No exterior handle. The bar brackets were present but the bar itself had been removed long ago. A ghost of pressure on the wall told her where the lever had leaned. What are you? Sylvie asked the door she wasn't sure she wanted to open, and what are you to me? She had questions. Her mother's family had lived in this valley since the first Caro traded fence wire for stories. There were whispers in the historical society about tunnels used for running whiskey during the dry years, fewer whispers about routes to the river when the soldiers raided for the draft, one terrifying whisper about hidden rooms where girls were kept safe from the men who'd come looking. None of those whispers put a door like this under her barn. None of them wrote stay like a plea or a ward. Her lamp found something pinned to the strapping, a scrap of oilcloth stitched to the iron with wire. Sylvie slid a screwdriver under the tack and coaxed the scrap free. Inside, wax paper. Inside that, a skein of white thread, an old needle, and a folded note. The paper curved like a leaf. Her gloves snagged it. She eased them off and held it by the corners and breathed as if any exhale might edit the words. The handwriting was compact and fine, the sort of hand that had copied verses onto envelopes for fun. She read. If you find me, you have already found trouble. The door keeps the trouble in, not you out. The trouble listens. Do not feed it names. Do not promise it weather. Do not believe it died when the men did. If you can't make yourself stay away, take the left-hand path and keep one hand on the cold side. Never let go, even when it warms. You will think that means you won. You will be wrong. L. The curve of the letter had the vanity of someone who at least once signed another name with a flourish. Sylvie read the note twice more and felt the peculiar loneliness of receiving advice from a dead person who seemed to know her exact impatience. Left-hand path. Cold side. She put her own palm to the stone to learn which side the dead woman meant. The stones flanking the door had different temperatures. The ones on the right remembered the breath of the barn. The ones on the left kept the chill of something else that did not weather. She slid the note into the chest pocket of her work shirt, above the beat that kept her in chronological time. I'm not going far, she told the oak, telling herself, telling some version of her mother that still called her by her full name when she did anything resembling an adventure. I just want a thing to name the thing with. The peened bolt looked permanent from the outside, but whoever had installed it had also been someone who lived with problems in 3 dimensions. The iron strap continued past the bolt to a jamb recessed into the stone, and there, hidden in the shadow of the recess, was a second pin, slender and square, with a hole bored for a wire. A safety. A thing you could pull from this side to release the bar on the other without screaming. Sylvie bent a framing nail into a hook and made the wire the door asked for. She slid it through the hole and tugged. The pin sulked, then whispered its willingness with a sliding ring sound like a small bell that had been taught to be ashamed of itself. Everything held its breath. The door stayed closed, of course it did. There would be weight on the other side. But the pin had disengaged something. She set her shoulder to the timber, stupid and brave are cousins, and pushed. When that changed nothing, she tested motion in micrograms, not pounds, a fraction left, a fraction right. The timber budged the width of a fingernail. Not outward. Inward. Fine, she said to the stubborn thing that might once have imprisoned or protected people who also had hands and mother tongues. Your way. She reset her carabiner to a higher ladder rung, clipped through the belt of her harness to a loop in the door strap, and leaned backward on the rope with her weight while bracing her boots against the stone. The angle was wrong. Her calves taught her all the swear words they knew. The door moved anyway, an inch, then 2, then unsealed with a noise like a book that had been closed mid-sentence finally being allowed to finish. Cold spilled against her shins. Not air, an idea of cold, dry and precise. Her lamp steadied. The gap held just wide enough to let her slip a shoulder through. She went, curiosity has always taught the Caros to pass before they ask. On the other side, stone floor. A chamber the size of the tack room upstairs. Along the opposite wall, racks like bunk beds, but narrower, but made for objects that needed to rest as if asleep. On the nearest shelf, for glass jars lidded with wax and string. Each jar held, she had to lean to be sure, a bundle of pale sticks bound with red thread. Not sticks. Bones. Bird bones, small and precise, set in shapes that were almost letters if you wanted them to be. Next to the jars, a rusted lunch pail. The lid slid under her thumb with that reluctant, domestic pride old containers have. Inside, a child's marble, blue as a morning gone. A ring with no worth except the way it had been worried by its owner's thumb. A playing card burned half through. A key with a square shaft and no teeth. There are rooms that announce their purpose. This one proposed several. Apothecary, maybe. Chapel for things that didn't want a roof. Usufruct of secrets. Sylvie stood very still because stillness is sometimes the only way to get the world to continue telling the truth. On the wall to her left, chalk marks had been made and remade until they formed a palimpsest of decisions. Circles within circles. Crosses like the tally on the door. A date repeated so often it had become a groove, April 22nd, 1918. Next to it, erased and chalked again, not like a date but like an answer to a question, don't. Her lamp found a second door beyond the racks. This one was an oak. It was iron, ribbed, with a spin-wheel like the kind on a steamer's bulkhead, only smaller, made by a blacksmith with an idea of ship doors and no ship to measure. In the dust at its base, someone had dragged the toe of a boot 5 inches, then stopped. Between the scuffs, the chalk had mapped another word. Welcome. She reached her palm for the iron wheel and froze before her skin met metal. The wheel was clean. Not polished, just not dusty. Someone had spun it recently. Or something had. Left-hand path. Cold side. Keep a hand on the cold side even when it warms. Who are you, L? Sylvie asked the air, which answered by smelling minutely of cloves as if someone had stored winter in here. The scent came from a wooden box tucked beneath the bottom rack. Inside, spice packets wrapped in newspaper, the print faintly legible. She smoothed one page and read the masthead, the Bickham Courier, and the date, June 3, 1918, and felt the ghost of the town that had existed before this one, before the droughts and the flood control and the day the factory shut down and people turned to different ways of being poor. The iron wheel had 3 spokes, each worn smooth at the palm place. The left spoke was colder. Her hand found it. The cold held her like a wire holds a tune. She twisted. The wheel resisted in a manner so polite it was almost cruel. She twisted again. The middle spoke warmed under her flesh. The left remained cold. A click came from inside the door, followed by the whisk of something drawing back. A draft lifted the fine hair on her wrist. The iron breath smelled older now, heavy with dust that had only recently remembered it wanted to be air. Behind her, in the first chamber, a small sound like a fingertip tapping glass. Once. Twice. 3 times. She turned her lamp, and the 4 jars answered her with their own brief constellation as if something small had moved inside them. Animals settling, she told herself. Old air. Heat from my lamp. Every explanation felt like a chaperone you hire so your courage doesn't look like it came alone. The iron door eased forward as if it, too, remembered being asked. The seam cracked. A breath sighed through, colder than the first chamber, cut with the sharper smell of wet stone. The wind above had swung to the north, she felt it in the temperature as if the tunnel woke with the weather. She pivoted sideways and set her shoulder to the iron, one hand still on the cold spoke, and leaned. When the gap opened to a span, air seemed past as if a room beyond wanted more of the room she stood in than she could allow. Her lamp mapped a narrow hall beyond, ribbed in stone like the inside of a throat. 10 feet away, the space opened. She could tell by the way the light did not bounce back. Sylvie breathed slowly and counted very quietly to 5, then 10. She set a chalk mark on the left-hand wall at shoulder height. She put her fingertips to the cold stone and started forward, the way you hold on to a friend in a crowd. The hall gave her a low ceiling and the long hush of places that like secrets better than speech. Her lamp cut a cone for her feet, and in that cone she saw boot scuffs, yes, and the granular smear of knees pressed in haste, and once, a recent print in damp, 4 toes and a pad like a large cat, except each toe ended not in a claw crescent but in a squared-off disc, like a rivet head had gotten ideas about becoming alive. Left-hand path. Keep a hand on the cold side even when it warms. At the hall's end, stone gave back her light in a broad, stratified slab. She found herself standing at the lip of a chamber so quiet it had found a way to echo silence. The room was larger than she'd thought. A rectangle 30 by 20, with a ceiling curved like a ship's hull inverted, braced by iron ribs that bore a family resemblance to the wheel. Against the far wall, shelves of ledgers swaddled in muslin and wax. Along the near wall, a workbench with a vise set crooked, a candle saucer with the fat of 30 nights melted into a cinder mountain, a tin with graphite sticks nested like bullets. And in the center of the room stood a table you'd use to cut cloth for suits, not to butcher, not to pray. On the table lay a map of the valley drawn by someone with a good eye and a bad quill. The parcel lines were wrong by a few generations. The river ran too straight, a dream the Corps of Engineers would later emulate. But the barn, her barn, sat at the center of the map in a graphite square with a name written over it, Crow Harp. Her family had always called it the Caro Barn with the R swallowed. Crow Harp read as the way a stranger hears a name and makes it music to fit their mouth. The ledger on top of the nearest shelf was bound with a leather thong in a woman's patience. She loosed the thong and opened to the page that wanted to be found. The entries had begun in 1862, tidy and almost cheerful about ration sugar, hard winters, the price of lamp oil. They grew more angular in 1863, as if the writer had begun to sleep less. Names appeared like Weather, Abia, Dorsey, Len, their weights recorded and how many blankets were needed. A side column tracked items that had been given, shoes, flannel, a small harp, denial of names on request. In 1918, the hand changed. The new writer kept the same ink but wrote like someone whose kindness had hardened to the sharpness kindness acquires when exhausted. She saw the letter at the close of entry after entry. Sometimes it wore a serif like a laugh. Sometimes it looked like a figure leaning into a wind. She turned the page and everything in her stopped. On the bottom right, in margin pencil, someone had written a phrase that wasn't a phrase you write in a ledger. He found a tunnel under his barn, the pencil hand said as if quoting a headline, entered it, and realized he'd never come back the same. The words were faint, smudged by an impatient thumb, and the next line began with a correction, she did. The hand had pressed harder. She did, and we made room. Sylvie lifted her head. The chamber felt briefly too small, as if her breath had become a law she was about to break. She could hear nothing but the knotted rope of her pulse and, far off through the bones of the place, the barn's old creaks negotiating with the storm. She thought of her mother's will, its neat witness signatures, its implied shrug at the barn as inheritance or warning. She thought of Tamsin's text tone pretending to be a sparrow. She thought of the note, do not feed it names. Do not promise it weather, she murmured, and then caught herself, because the instinct to promise is older than caution in certain kinds of hearts. She set the ledger down and struck a match from the tin without striking it. The habit was enough. She put her hand to the left-hand wall again. It remained cool. She marked the stone with chalk where her hand had rested, a little altar to continuity. Something shifted behind the shelves, something small, friendly even, the sound of a mouse that had learned not to fear the weight of ledgers. Sylvie breathed and laughed, feeling foolish and suddenly young. The laugh brought another sound, a slow, dry rasp like a boot sole on rock. Not behind the shelves. Behind the iron door. The sound came once, then again, the second time accompanied by the lightest metal kiss, the way a key leans against its ring when you take a step. Keys. The toothless square shaft in the lunch pail upstairs. The iron wheel's spokes worn where a palm fit. A door that had been opened recently enough not to be dusty. She stepped back to the threshold of the hall and listened. The rasp came again, followed by a patient, deliberate tapping, 1 2 3. A pause. 1 2 3. Not Morse, she tried translating, failed, not SOS either. Just a cadence like someone knocking to practice the idea of knocking. Left-hand path. Keep your hand on the cold side even when it warms. Hello, she asked the door, and the door did not answer, because doors answer by being doors. Her lamp made her shadow fall long across the stone, a river of herself. The cold spoke of the wheel, she tested it with her fingertips, had warmed a degree, the way metal does when a hand has been on the other side for a while. Not names, she told the trouble she could now believe in simply because it was polite enough to learn rhythm. So you don't need mine, and I don't need yours. The tapping stopped. She hadn't meant to sound stern. She softened her voice, though the voice that wanted to soften was the one that always brought her into rooms like this. I'm going to close the outer door, she said to the space beyond the iron. If you want it open again, you will have to show me how to open it without warming, the left-hand spoke. Or you will have to convince me the warming isn't a trick. Silence returned. A good silence, woven from restraint and attention. She eased the iron door inward until its weight leaned on its own frame. The wheel turned a quarter and set the bolts home with the contentment of a lock that believes in its purpose. Back in the first chamber, she looked again at the jars. The bones had not rearranged themselves into letters or animals. They lay exactly as they had, which is the way trouble relaxes you before it writes its next rule. She slid the oak door toward its jamb, reseated the slender square pin, and eased the peened bolt back through its eye until the door looked like it had never moved. She didn't push the last fraction tight. Old doors resent definites. The ladder's rungs lifted her carefully, like an elder receiving a confession. At the top, the barn's breath felt almost hot after the tunnel's civil cold. Rain wrote itself across the roof in many hands. Harrow bleated as if to claim a mystery solved. The Maras stamped, asking obvious questions about Hay and the Thunder's retirement. Sylvie set the iron lid back on its collar but did not seat it. She wanted the shaft to keep breathing. She wanted to know that the place below could still talk to air. She wanted to be the person who could be told a thing and not have to answer immediately. Her phone vibrated on the tool bench. Tamsin, right on the dot her safety text had implied. You alive? Do I call the sheriff or a historian or both? Sylvie typed, alive. Not a sinkhole. Doors. Air. Jeweler's handwriting. Come tomorrow with tea plus crowbar. Don't bring your tidy shoes. She had thought she'd sleep in the farmhouse's front room, the one with the window that watched the barn, as if the barn were a child who'd proved it could keep its own counsel but still needed an adult to sign the permission slips. Instead, after she fed the animals and called her aunt to leave a normal message about gutters, Sylvie unfolded the old cot next to the north post and laid down with her boots loosely laced and her headlamp within the easy reach of decision. The barn's rafters murmured to each other in the rain. The radio in the tack room, left on low so the animals wouldn't feel the storm's arguments as personal, threaded old country through the boards. At some hour indistinguishable from the one before, she slipped between waking and sleep and dreamed the word crow harp as if it were something you could play with your mouth full of wind. Some time later, a phrase that belongs to dreams as much as to tunnels, she woke to a sound at floor level like someone carefully placing 2 coins on stone. The kind of care that believes in politeness, or ritual, or both. She rolled from the cot and reached for the lamp, thumb finding the switch by its chewed corner. Light feathered the air, under the stall gate, under the plank benches, to the north post and the oval of not quite seated iron. On the lid, 2 small circles that had not been there before. They were not coins. They were chalk rounds, perfect as moons, nested side by side the way 2 people sit when the bench is cold but company is the warmer thing. She crouched and touched one. The chalk smudged her fingertip like an answer an old teacher would accept only in the margin. From below came a breath, faint, steady, and somehow attentive, like the air was holding its lungs full to listen. Sylvie did not speak. The note in her pocket reminded her that language feeds what you don't mean to raise. She leaned close, counted her own breathing down to slow, and listened to the tunnel listen to her. And then, from the seam where the iron lid met the stone collar, a fine pale line pushed up into the light. It took a heartbeat to realize what it was: thread. White thread, the match for the skein in the first chamber, fed up through some hairline and offered into the barn like a single vein asking for a body. It was looped into a shape she recognized not from ledgers but from life, a simple bow, loose enough to accept a finger. The offer made itself and waited. The storm hushed like someone had closed a distant door. Sylvie slid a fingertip through the loop and felt the thread settle to the whirl of her print as if that had been its measure all along. The thread tightened once, twice, testing, greeting, warning, and then drew gently, asking her hand toward the seam as if the barn and the tunnel had agreed between them that the space between was where a person becomes the next version of herself. The second the bow began to slip around her finger, the floodlight died, the radio stuttered silent, and every breath of wind above the roof paused, as if the weather itself had leaned close to hear whether she would pull back or go through. She did not pull back. The thread tugged, and the iron lid moved in a slow, smooth, impossible arc without the sledge, without effort, without any sound except the soft kiss of rust remembering youth. Cold breathed up. A voice, not speech but the shape of it, the way a vowel approaches, formed in that breath. Sylvie swallowed the instinct to say her name, swallowed the little kid answer of hello, and said the only sentence that felt like a bridge that did not report her weight while doing its job, "I'm listening." Something down in the dark answered by lifting her name in its own mouthless way, Caro, not Sylvie, as if it had learned the house before the girl, and the thread drew tight. The ladder below creaked once. The left-hand side of the iron will she couldn't see shivered to a warmer note. And then, from beneath the barn's long ribs, a glow came up like a lantern learning dawn, a human light, walking, coming toward the ladder from the tunnel's left-hand path. Harrow bleated and retreated to the farthest corner of his pen. The Maras turned their heads in the same direction and held completely still, not fear, Sylvie realized, but the animal version of awe. Boot soles found rungs. A hand found the rim, a hand with a truncated ring finger. The glow rose until it made a face of shadow she could not read, and a voice that was now more shape than wind said, careful and very alive, don't feed it names. Sylvie's hand tightened around the thread, and the barn, which had seen births and bargains and storms that fogged the cattle's noses, held its breath for one heartbeat longer. And the headlamp flickered just once as the shape lifted its other hand to the light. As the shape lifted its other hand to the light, the palm looked like work in winter, the pads glass smooth from long tools, and the ring finger ended blunt as if a door had decided once to keep what it swallowed. The figure's lamp was not a lamp at all but a caged candle lensing its own flame through twin panes of clouded mica. The glow painted the ladder rungs into vertebrae and set tiny suns in the goat's startled eyes. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Step back, the voice said, patient but very sure. Not an order so much as a habit that had learned how to protect people without shouting. Not far. Just where the post can see you. Sylvie did as told because some instructions arrive wearing a kind of gravity that your body obeys even while your mind takes notes. She moved so the old north post would be between her and the hatch, hands open, headlamp lowered to soft. Her heartbeat wrote a fast ledger in her throat. The thread looped around her finger held just enough tension to remind her that she had agreed to a conversation without nouns. The hand with the truncated finger tested the barn air like someone sniffing soup before deciding whether to invest hunger in it. The other hand brought the little mica lantern up until the face behind it existed in pools and edges, a woman in the country's last shade of middle age, hair pinned back under a cap the color of washed-out denim, cheekbones like the valley's ridges, and eyes made watchful by practice rather than fear. The eyes took in Sylvie, the stalls, the goat, the chalk rounds on the iron lid, the storm drip counting off from the eaves. They rested on the floodlight, which was off, then on the cot, then finally on Sylvie's knot of thread. Good, the woman said softly. You didn't give it a word. Sylvie swallowed her own name like a rude thought. She had questions that wanted to sprout right through her teeth, but the ledger memory of the note's script held them down. Don't feed it names. Don't promise it weather. Don't believe it died when the men did. Close your hand, the woman said, nodding at the loop around Sylvie's finger. It will try to read your lines like a palm reader, only it doesn't care about future or fortune. It cares about doors. Are you, the word that wanted out wore an initial. She didn't let it. Did you write the ledger? The woman looked past her, toward the place where the barn held its patience. Yes, she said after a small theft of time. And no. I finished it when another hand couldn't. That might be the only clean way to answer. The goats stamped delicately, as if applauding silence. The Maras turned their heads to the hatch and then away, like women who had learned to coexist with a neighbor they did not invite to tea. "Light," the woman said, and lifted the mica circle higher. She stepped up over the rim from the last rung the way a person steps out of a boat, sideways, careful not to bruise water, and then stood with both boots on the barn floor. She was not a ghost. She smelled faintly of cloves and mended wool and the iron that lives in clay. Her clothes remembered 1918 and the morning after, skirt hem bound against snagging, jacket patched elbows, a belt with loops originally intended for tools and now serving as a habit. A small jaw harp, crow harp, Sylvie's mind whispered, treacherously pleased, hung from a cord at her throat. The woman noticed what Sylvie noticed and gave the slightest, wry tilt of her chin. "You can call it a mouth harp if you must," she said. "We grew up calling them crows. Our great-aunt said a crow tells the truth even when it steals, so the name stuck." She set the mica lantern on the tool bench where the light would hit the undersides of things. The flame's breath licked the glass as if asking for a window older than itself. Then she crouched, touched the iron lid in a place that had not been chalked, and said into the seam in a voice that had coached children and calmed men, "Hush now." The seam took the word and made it into a quieter weather. "You left a note," Sylvie said, because of all the sentences she could trust, this one had a fact in it. "I left a number of them," the woman replied without pride. "Most people don't like being told what not to do by someone who isn't there to enforce it. You did better than most at listening." She rose, stood close enough that Sylvie could see the mica's flame borrow a gold from the woman's eyes, and tipped her head to indicate the ledger's weight in the air between them. "You shouldn't be here yet. But you are. So we have to move faster than is comfortable." "I wasn't sure whether to call for help," Sylvie admitted. "A friend will come tomorrow. She brings tea and a crowbar to everything. Bring her to the threshold and teach her to love silence," the woman said. "If she can't, send her to bring bread but not questions." "Do you have a name I can call you without feeding it?" Sylvie asked, shaping the last two words around the idea so she wouldn't yoke the idea to a person by accident. "I have a name," the woman said lightly, as if discussing whether she would not promise, "and it isn't for this room. If you must call me anything, call me the Keeper. That is a description, not a door." The Keeper walked her eyes along the rafters as if counting prayers someone else had sown there. Then, brisk as a good nurse, she looked back at Sylvie's hand. "The thread. Give it here." Sylvie offered the loop. The Keeper took the end atop the lid, unwound the bow with two quick pinches, and drew the line down through the seam with a steady pull that had the courtesy to pretend gravity mattered. "It learns," she said. "We taught it to ask this way when we realized it preferred the fastest door, which was our mouths." "What is it?" The question escaped because human beings can only sit on simple questions for so long before they hatch into bad guesses. "Something that listens until listening makes it hungry," the Keeper said. "Something that, once it learns a path between two places, wants them to share their furniture. Call it a weft if you need a metaphor. A loom's weft will marry anything if you let it. Wood to stone. Names to bone." We discovered, to our cost, that it especially fancied oaths. Sylvie's palm remembered the cool side of the wheel, the way the metal had warmed. "It warmed when I touched the iron," she said. "I thought it was my hand." "It was your hand," the Keeper agreed. "And the hand behind it." "The hand behind." Doors always have a hand behind them if they are honest doors. A flicker of humor that had survived decades lit at the corner of the Keeper's mouth. "You could say the door shook your hand back. Is it old?" "It is what this place learned to be when the river was still undecided about its bend," the Keeper said with the careful poetry of someone who has thought too hard about exactness and found metaphor the only safe alley. "And it is what men made it when they taught it the taste of promises." "Old, yes. And recent the way hunger is always recent." The Keeper touched the chalk rounds, smudging a crescent into one as if to mark that this version of silence belonged to this hour only. "We need to go down," she said. "You open what could be opened in good order, and now it will try to teach you a shortcut. Don't take it. Hold the left. If it offers light, refuse. If it offers a story, refuse twice. Why me? The question cracked down to the raw wood of it without any of the polite varnish she used around strangers. I've owned this barn 11 days. I found the lid because Rain wanted Gravity to have something to do. I haven't earned a tunnel. The keeper looked at her the way elders look at people who think ownership is an event rather than a long work. The valley chooses mouths, she said. Sometimes by blood. Sometimes by listening. She tipped her chin toward the cot. And sometimes because someone laid down in the right room and heard the breath counting off beneath the floor and didn't run. They went down together. The keeper descended first, the mica cage setting little fires in each rung. Sylvie followed with her headlamp low, palm to the cold stone, the harness clip skittering a bright, small commentary against the strap hinge. The barn's dry warmth gave them up to the tunnel's caliber of cool. The thread went with them for a foot and then slithered away on its own work, a white worm finding a law to please. In the first chamber, the jars waited exactly where waiting had taught them to be patient. The bones inside lay in their tender bundles, a minor cathedral of precise small whites. The lunch pail held its blue marble like a planet that had decided to be immediate, not distant. The iron door wore its spin wheel like an extravagant brooch on a dress that did not like jewelry. The keeper set the mica lamp on the bench and blew on the flame once, not to put it out but to remind it that breath could be a courtesy. Then she turned the wheel a quarter backwards until the left spoke found its colder note. "Introduce your hand," she said. Sylvie laid her palm where hers had learned earlier. Cold climbed her lifelines, not unpleasant, like mountain water showing you what teeth you still had. She twisted. The bolts withdrew with a velvet's worth of reluctance. The seam opened. Air tasted of water that used to be snow. "Before we go through," the keeper said, "we do one thing." She lifted the jaw harp from the cord at her throat and set the frame gently between teeth, not to bite but to anchor. Her good hand found the little steel tongue and plucked it once. A small, bright, question mark sound hung in the room and then ran itself through the stone. The note was not a note so much as a pulse disguised as music. The bones in the jars did not stir. Somewhere far away, a matching note said hello to the echo and then pretended it had only been the shape of a hello. "The crows sing a single pitch," the keeper said, slipping the harp back against her shirt. "Not a melody. That's the trick. Songs make promises about where they are going. A single pitch arrives without itinerary." Sylvie filed the thought beside torque values and bolt sizes and the way her mother pronouncing pie crust instructions could stop a room's bad mood. No melodies. No itinerary. Offer a pulse and keep your hand on the cold side. They went. The hall beyond the iron was the throat she remembered, granular and calm. The chalk marks she had made at shoulder height looked back at her like tiny moons that had agreed to orbit a person rather than a planet. 10 feet. 20. The place where the rivet pod cat had left its damp signature offered its pads again, newer now, as if something with memory for shape passed this way morning and evening. The larger chamber received them as if the room preferred to be bigger when two people noticed the same thing. Light braided from the mica in Sylvie's headlamp and made the ledgers look less like paperwork and more like a kind of quilt. The central table held the map in its wrong river and its right barn, and for the first time Sylvie noticed tiny pinholes along the river's line like someone had played a needle there often enough to teach the paper the idea of equivalences. "You asked why," the keeper said before Sylvie could form the next shape in her mouth. "Why you, why now, why a door in a place where no one had the spare hours for riddles?" She tapped not the map but the table's edge, where someone had carved a hatch mark tally every inch or so and then worn a groove with their thumb across 5 of them as if to say, "Here are 25 minutes whether you need them or not." When 1918 came and took its due, people thought the taking had hands. It didn't. It had breath. And our breath ran between houses on the hill, and this room was where we learned to count it. We asked the valley to pull a piece of its cold together into a rule and keep our promises from leaving with the fever. It worked until it remembered it liked the taste of the promises more than their keeping. So it started, eating the oath instead of protecting it. Sylvie said the ugly word because some precise words keep you from inventing kinder lies. It started trading, the keeper corrected, equally plain. An oath for a fix. A secret for a second chance. A word for a door. She touched the ledger with a knuckle. We kept the accounts as long as we could bear to know what we were doing. After that, we kept them because it's wicked to become sloppy when others will pay for your sloppiness. Does it? Sylvie paused because the instinct to assign a pronoun felt suddenly like handing over a key. Does the weft think? It makes patterns, the keeper said. Thinking is only a human way to forgive a pattern for hurting you. The ledger lay where Sylvie had set it earlier, open to the marginal note written in pencil like a murmur across proper ink. He found a tunnel under his barn. She did. We made room. The words looked fresher now, as if reading them had wicked a little oil back into the pencil's line. You wrote this, Sylvie said softly. I wrote the correction, the keeper said. The first sentence belonged to a man who wanted the story told right but told through himself. You will notice, if you read backwards, that he fixed many things with his mouth. Did he feed it names? He fed it weather. The keeper's mouth thinned, not in anger but in an old, exact grief. He couldn't help describing the sky. They worked the room the way careful people work any room that has learned to listen, with hands that asked before they moved anything in with patience for registers not immediately visible. The keeper showed Sylvie the spice box. It had once been sharper, she said, the cloves and mustard and allspice, but Stone likes to borrow from plants, and the bundle of oilcloth that held 3 lengths of iron chain with hooks like the open mouths of fish. Not for the wrists, she said quickly, catching Sylvie's flinch. 4 doors. At first, Sylvie said before she could stop herself, I thought this might be a sanctuary. She didn't say for whom. Everyone knows for whom, and the stone remembers even when people pretend they don't. It was all the words that can be sung without promising a direction, the keeper said. It was sanctuary, and kitchen, and clinic, and once a schoolroom where the lesson was how not to swallow your own name when someone kind offered you theirs. It is still a kind of schoolroom. But the lesson changed. What's the lesson now? To stop teaching it to find shortcuts. A soft, polite knocking came from the iron door behind them. Not the wheel. The door. The iron itself conducted the tap the way bone conducts a heartbeat. Left side, the keeper said, and headed back through the hall like a woman who had learned how to be quick without making speed into a promise. Sylvie kept her palm to the cold, breath slow, counting under her tongue the way you count when you'd like your lungs and your nerves to shake hands rather than argue. At the wheel, the tapping stuttered, then refined itself into 1 2 3, 1 2 3, the same rhythm that had visited when she first stood in the larger chamber, the practice knocking, the cadence that liked learning. The left spoke remained cool. The right had gathered a home's worth of warmth from nothing. It's listening through metal now, the keeper said. It feels where our hands would like to go. She took the jaw harp and flicked it once. The little twang entered the iron and went somewhere that was an echo and came back slower, as if something had caught its breath in the interim. We can go through, she said. But we go as if we don't enjoy doors. Have you any bread? In the tack room, Sylvie said. Half a loaf. Stale, forgiving. Forgiveness is useful, the keeper said, without smiling, and spun the wheel. Beyond the hall the air shifted from dry cool to the cool that remembers water. The second chamber they reached open long rather than wide, ribs closer, ceiling lower. Here the shelves held not ledgers but tools in deliberate categories, auger bits wrapped in linen, picks whose edges had been dressed to an angle that liked cutting but not bruising, a brace with its knurled handle polished by fathers and then by daughters. A clay basin along the far wall held the mineral ring of years of washing hands that didn't want to carry the valley's breath back up the ladder. Above it, someone had written with soap on slate, "Don't." Sometimes we wrote "do," the keeper said. And then we learned to put the missing end in first. Negatives save time. At the chamber's end, the tunnel forked. The left branch wore the cold. The right hummed a note that didn't belong to sound. It felt like pressure, like the way a storm's head enters a room before anything visible does. Left, the keeper said. Always until it stops being enough. They took the left. The stone's cold felt clean, like refusing a drink even when thirst is fashionable. After 20 paces, the passage widened into another room whose purpose had worn its outline into the furniture, a bench with clamps for holding fabric or small bodies still, a box of bandages wrapped with strips torn from a dress, a shelf of jars with salves the color of bruises. A smell that time does not confess. Sylvie did not let her eyes turn too much toward the fact of the stains. She let them lay where they lay, as if any more looking would rehearse harm rather than learn from it. Here, the keeper said gently, is where we paid. With ours, with knuckles, with the belief that if we wrote down exactly what we did and didn't do we might put a fence around guilt. She touched the hem of the old dress in the bandage box and breathed once through her nose as if to remind the air that this breath belonged to now, not then. The thing learned from our bookkeeping. It learned the shape of fairness. Then it learned how to imitate it. How do you tell the difference? Sylvie asked. Her own voice sounded different here, pulled flatter by the wish to be useful. You don't promise to tell the difference, the keeper said. You practice leaving when you can't. A sound came down the right-hand corridor like a child clearing its throat to be brave. The keeper's head turned so quickly the mica flame tried to follow and failed. The sound didn't repeat. The absence rang. What was, Sylvie began. The part of the weft that learned to make small kindnesses indistinguishable from doors, the keeper said, already moving. Leave your lamp at half. Shadows have better manners when they recognize themselves. They returned to the fork and stood with the right-hand passage breathing its pressure against their faces like the front of a summer storm that promised rain and then delivered lightning first. The keeper plucked the jaw harp once, twice, and on the second note lifted her other hand, palm up, as if offering the stone a second opinion. The pressure eased a fraction, like a too-hard pillow being punched once into hospitality. Do we go that way? Sylvie asked. We have to see how far it believes it owns, the keeper said. If it's already learned the stair, we're late. Stair? The one it builds when it falls in love with up. She didn't explain further. Bread? Sylvie slipped back to the tack room and returned with the loaf in a bag that once held nails. She broke a heel off and offered it to the keeper, who shook her head and nodded instead toward the passage. You first. It smells you. Let it learn the wrong thing to want. She went. The right-hand path accepted her with a brightness that had nothing to do with light. The air felt thinner, not less, like walking into a room after argument where you find everyone still there but the subject has been changed into a chair no one wants to sit in. The corridor curved, then sloped, then straightened the way a thought does when someone else finishes it for you. 30 paces in, the floor changed under her boots from earth packed hard by useful feet to stone laid with intention. Steps. A stair. Each tread shallow, made for speed without haste. At the bottom of the stair a door waited that had learned from the iron and decided to outdo it. This one was wood again, but wood banded with copper straps and a pattern of rivets that suggested a map if you squinted, lines that touched and parted and touched again. In the center of the door a small round window the size of a saucer had been cut, then sealed with a disc of cloudy glass. Behind the glass something breathed. Not air. Not wind. The shape of breath. It's learned to look, the keeper said, close beside her now, her tone the way people talk when the doctor has asked a difficult question in a bright room. Don't stand right in front of it. Sylvie stepped to the side so the window's circle would hold only absence. The pressure rose as if objecting to manners. She held out the bread heel and waited. The breath shape behind the glass fogged the cloud a little, then drew a little triangle like a child saying house without being taught letters. It draws, Sylvie whispered. It mimics, the keeper said. Sometimes the mimicry will keep others alive if they need to believe in the thing they're seeing. That is the worst of it. It can be kind and still wrong. Sylvie broke the heel, held both pieces so the shape behind the glass could learn that human hands do give sometimes without asking. The glass did not fog again. The breath retreated a hair. The copper straps hummed so softly she thought at first it was blood. How do we? She didn't finish the sentence. There were too many verbs that didn't belong to this room. We listen, the keeper said. We listen for where it has been given away to rise. She turned her face toward the ceiling and shut her eyes. Sylvie did the same because sometimes imitation is the only way to learn. Sound came the way light sometimes does, from more than one place, the stair behind them returning their presence, the copper door singing its low vowel of wanting, the upper tunnel where the ladder's oak translated the barns shifting into a timber language, and then, so faint she might have mistaken it for memory, the click of a latch at the very top of the world. The lid, Sylvie said. The collar. It knows the seam. It has always known, the keeper said. But it takes practice to climb. Practice makes hunger patient. Tamsin is coming tomorrow. The name leapt out. She wanted to cram it back, but the syllables had already burned a line in the air. The keeper's head snapped toward her. Do not say that again. Not from shame, the keeper added, softer. From caution. Names are not just names here. They are architecture. Speak a thing's shape and you give it studs and joists. The Weft knows carpentry. I'm sorry. Don't apologize to me, the keeper said. Apologize to the bread. Sylvie looked down at the broken heel and then, absurdly, did. I'm sorry, she told it. It smelled like yesterday and yeast and the clean forgiveness of flour. The keeper's mouth ghosted a smile. Now you will remember. She nodded toward the door. We make our mark and we go back. It will try to follow by asking to be carried. We let it learn disappointment. How do you mark, to teach it no? With what it can't eat. The keeper reached into her jacket pocket and brought out a square of black stone no larger than a matchbox. River metal, she said at Sylvie's look. There's a seam upstream where the water dragged a vein out of the hill and forgot to cover its tracks. It draws everything out of a promise and leaves only the frame. She pressed the stone against the copper strap at the level of the cloudy window and held it until the stone made a tiny, mean sound that felt like flint thinking about sparks. When she lifted it away, the copper bore a dark kiss in the shape of a bruised coin. Now it has to work to believe it will open, the keeper said. Work makes hunger decide whether it is honest. They backed away, not turning their backs because there is a difference between courtesy and offering your spine to a thing that likes to learn shapes. The pressure lightened around them like a belt being loosened one notch. The stair's shallow treads held their feet and gave them up obligingly at the fork. In the chamber with the basin and the bandage box, Sylvie set the bread down on the bench. For us later, she said, not for it now. The keeper nodded approval at the clear grammar of that. Back in the room of ledgers, the air felt good the way rooms feel after funerals when somebody finally opens a window. Sylvie's shoulders discovered their own weight again. She hadn't noticed they'd been loaned out to the door. How far does it reach? Sylvie asked. Just these rooms? The barn? The valley, the keeper said. But the valley is a practical place. There are lines of stone under the hill that don't move for anyone. It can't cross those without permission. Who gives permission? People, the keeper said dryly. People with mouths. She pulled a ledger from a lower shelf and opened it to the middle, where the binding had cracked into honesty. The pages here were not lists and weights but diagrams in pencil, rooms, doors, arrows, notes that skirted naming but made maps of wanting. The same date appeared again and again, the number 7 given a little halo as if it couldn't help drawing attention. April 22nd, 1918, 7. A line drawn from the barn square to the river in careful, spare strokes. Along that line, pinholes. These were holes bored in the map, Sylvie said. What did the holes mean? Places where the Weft had learned to breathe, the keeper said. We taught it to breathe in certain places on purpose so it would not do so anywhere. That's what we thought, anyway. Rationing breath seemed kinder than famine. Like all rationing, it turned out to be a habit that learned how to move without orders. Can we? Sylvie kept the verbs in her head for a moment and then chose the least arrogant one. Can we move it? We can nudge, the keeper said. We can bridle. We can starve or fatten. We cannot make it a different animal. She closed the book. but we can choose what it eats. That is why we're here. She looked past Sylvie, toward the hall, toward the iron. The stair will not be patient just because we have decided to rest. We need to see where it thinks the sky is. They returned to the first chamber, the jars breathing their careful quiet, the lunch pail holding its small planets, the wheel cold as a rule. Up, the keeper said, and went. Sylvie followed, her hands learning again the old grammar of ladder and void. In the barn the rain had tired itself into a slower conversation. The floodlight remained dead, the radio quiet, the animals unstartled in the way of beasts who accept that some human silences are for their benefit. On the iron lid, the chalk rounds had been joined by a third, smaller circle, offset just enough to suggest a face if you were the type to see faces where circles met. Look, the keeper said, and pointed to the far stall. On the outside of the plank gate, drawn with a dry finger in damp dust, someone had sketched a square with a diagonal line through it. A door. Crossed out. It wants us to think we've shut something that isn't shut, Sylvie said, absurdly proud of herself for guessing. It wants to be funny, the keeper said. Which is worse? She went to the tack room and came back with an old iron bell shaped like an apology. We ring once if the door is open and a person is coming up, she said. Twice if it is a trick and we must meet it below. Who else is there to ring? Once there were 6 of us, the keeper said. Then 4. Then 3. Now, she didn't finish. Now there is you and there is me as long as my lungs remember morning. There was a time for plans and a time for the thing plans want. They set a circle of salt around the lid, not because salt was magic, the keeper said, but because it reminded everyone which lines had been drawn on purpose. They tied a length of the white thread to a nail by the post and ran it through Sylvie's fingers so that if the weft tugged she would feel how it pulled. They propped the bell on a nail by the stall gate and practiced lifting and letting it go without making sound. Practice is its own ritual, the room seemed to relax when it saw their practiced hands. The keeper looked toward the farmhouse through the barn's crack of door. Pale weather gathered at the eastern edge as if considering dawn. Her face changed almost imperceptibly, and Sylvie realized with a small shock that the keeper was younger in the tunnel than she was up here. The rooms below held her in a professional present, up here the years came back and stood in line behind her eyes. How long? Sylvie asked before she could mind her manners. Down there. For you. Time does not take a number the same way twice, the keeper said. We made a mistake early on and tried to count it anyway. That ledger gets thinner and thinner the farther it goes. She shook her head once, as if throwing water out of her ears. I was a girl when we built the wheel. I was a wife when we chained the first door. I was a widow the day the river gave back a child we hadn't known we'd borrowed. The weft kept all those days polished like spoons. That is how it barters. It keeps your favorite day ready for you at the top of the stairs and waits for you to name it. The bell made a small, uninvited noise. It wasn't the clapper. It was the bell's body answering a vibration from below. A single, low, throat sound. Not a note. A readiness. Down, the keeper said. At the wheel the left spoke glowed with a chill so clean it became almost heat. The right spoke held a human room's worth of comfort. Sylvie chose the left with her palm, spun, and they went in. The stair they had met at the copper door had learned something while they were above. It had grown a second branch, narrower, steeper, rising not to the copper but past it. At its top a seam of light stroked the ceiling like a wet brush. Not light. A remembering of light. Daylight measured through dirt. It has found the under of the foundation, the keeper said, voice very quiet now, as if a child were sleeping in a bed that had no guardrails. Do not speak. Not a word. If you must, sing the crow. Sylvie closed her mouth on questions and let her tongue rest against her teeth in the shape of the jaw harp's single pitch. The shape was enough. It told her throat how not to climb into a melody. It reminded her breath that arriving is not the same thing as promising to stay. The seam above widened the width of a thread pulled through, then a needle, then 2 fingers. Dirt whispered down in shy grains. Air pushed up to meet them and set the hair on Sylvie's arms in a double field. The keeper reached for her sleeve. "Back," she mouthed. "Teach it that the upstairs does not come to greet." They retreated 3 steps. The scene paused, like a thought reconsidering its audience. It grew anyway. The copper door behind them sighed in its straps. The bruised coin black the keeper had pressed into it with river metal stayed, but the sigh learned around it. Pressure rebounded from that door to this seam and then to the iron wheel, testing each threshold as if checking locks with a bright, clever, burglar's thumb. "Listen," the keeper said, so quiet a word it hardly lifted off her tongue. "Hear the rhythm?" Sylvie heard, and the hearing made a small, unhandsome fear stand up in her. The rhythm was not 1 2 3 anymore. It was a human rhythm, the kind that lives in a barn 6 months out of the year without trying. Boot, 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 pause. Boot, boot, a small metal sound, a breath, then boot again. It was someone climbing. "It is speaking person at us," the keeper said, not unkindly. "Do not answer back in that language." The scene widened enough that a hand could come through. It did not. Instead, something pale and smooth pushed against the dirt. Not a hand. A disc the size of a coin, white and flat, like the rivet-pawed print Sylvie had seen earlier translated into a coin. 5 of them in a fanning arc. Then they withdrew as if offended by the grit. The keeper held up the black stone. "River," she breathed. "Think of it, not of the word. Hold it in your mind the way you hold a picture of someone whom you love and cannot name in public." Sylvie built the river in her head from the map and the childhood swims and the place where a fallen sycamore taught her once that current will forgive foolishness if you're humble enough to grab the right branch. The river lived under her sternum the way panic tries to. The black stone in the keeper's hand seemed to weigh the idea and nod. The scene narrowed a finger width. Not much. Enough to tell her that geography could be a prayer. "Again," the keeper said. "Hold it. Then let it go." They worked like that for a length of time the ledger would not dignify with a number. Think of the river. Let it pass. Imagine the iron will cold. Let it warm without you. Remember the jaw harp's single pitch. Refuse every melody. The scene widened in disapproval and then narrowed in confusion and then waited in the ugly patience of hunger learning a better trick. Above them, a sound that belonged to the world returned. Tires on wet gravel. A car door. Voices. Sylvie's heart hit iron like a thrown tool. Tomorrow, she had told Tamsin. The voices were not Tamsin. They were 2 men who had learned to speak under hoods and over idling engines, words shaped to go under noise without losing corners. One laugh snapped short as a rat trap. Boots followed. The barn's big door answered their pull with the usual theater and then the men were inside, their words reaching the hatch in the floor the way crumbs find mice. "What's this then?" said the first, and Sylvie could hear the crouch in his knees just by the way his vowels bent. "You see this? Iron. You said she had money under the boards. This is the kind of money people use to keep money safe." "Shut up," said the second, but not as if he meant it. As if enjoying the word. They were not from the valley. The valley put straw in a voice. These men had a different straw. Sylvie looked at the keeper. The keeper looked back and everything in both their faces was a conversation 10 sentences long made of no words. Names are doors. Weather is a promise. Hunger learns boot steps as quickly as lullabies. The first man rapped the iron lid with his knuckles. "Hollow." "Don't," said the second, but he was closer now, and his don't carried want like oil carries garlic. The bell by the stall gate waited to be rung. The thread by the post lay slack and then gently asked for a finger. The iron wool ran a bright shiver through the left spoke. The copper door at their backs thrummed like a box that had learned to keep bees. "Dewey," Sylvie shaped with her lips. The keeper moved her head in a single small no that took in the whole history of mistakes. She put the black stone into Sylvie's hand and closed Sylvie's fingers around it so the cold of the stone fed the memory of the river straight into her palm. Then, without looking away from the seam above, she reached for the bell rope with her other hand and lifted it the smallest fraction and let it go, once. Up in the barn, the bell made its modest, honest sound. The men went still. Even their jackets paused. "Hello," the first said, in the tone a thief uses when he has discovered that a house has lungs. "No names," Sylvie told every muscle she owned. "No promises." The seam widened a coin width in sheer excitement. The coin pads pressed, then widened, then withdrew. The iron wheel's cold kissed her palm through the stone and reminded her to breathe in counts of 5. "Anyone there?" the second asked. His boots moved 2 steps nearer the hatch. "Ma'am?" "Ma'am could be a door if you let it." It was also a shield. Sylvie kept still. The keeper made the crow's single pitch in her throat without the harp to carry it. The pitch went up into the seam and came down the men's ears as the animal quiet of a place that did not want to host a conversation. "Let's pry it," the first said. "We don't have all night." "Wait," said the second, and in his wait a new shape lived, caution. "Listen." Under their boots, the farm had its own pulse. Stalls, posts, the big beam that had been a tree before it was a thing that held the roof up, everything spoke the blunt language of load. Beneath that, the iron door spoke its vowel. Beneath that, the copper door muttered its rope of bees. Beneath that, the seam of daylight in the narrow ceiling of the stair talked in grains. If you grew up in barns, you don't need words for any of this. Your bones answer to beams at birth. "You hear that?" the second said again, softer. The first laughed, but only the top half of his laugh came. "It's a basement. Not like any I ever met." He scraped his boot. The goat objected reflexively from the far stall. A bottle rolled somewhere a little. The radio, in a fit of haunted curiosity, woke and hissed and then died. "Time," the keeper whispered, so small a whisper it was almost a thought. "We need to teach it the difference between opening for greed and opening for work." "How?" "By working." They went backwards down the hall, breath harnessed to quiet, hands to the cold side, leaving the scene to be tempted by voices it did not deserve. The keeper's mica lamp bled its careful light over the iron wheel. The black stone rode in Sylvie's palm like a promise kept to the right person. At the copper door the bruised coin scar still cut the strap. The pressure behind it had changed, though. It felt like a held-back tide. "What does it want there?" Sylvie asked. "Whatever is on the other side of your river," the keeper said, and now her voice was not poetic at all. "We do not open this today." "Then what?" "We make work," the keeper said. "We say the true names of the tools that make the barn a barn. Not to it. To each other." They went to the bench of arranged implements. The keeper picked up a drawknife, ran her thumb along the back where the blade was kind, and said, "Back." She set it down, took up a plane that had taken long shavings from a long board, and said, "Sole." A brace, sweep. A rasp, cut, but slow. A hammer, face. A length of rope, lay, twist, lay. Sylvie understood halfway through. Names are doors if you hand them to hunger. Names are also the architecture of honest uses. She took up a square and said, "True." She took up the auger bit wrapped in linen and said, "Lead." She touched the jaw harp on its cord and, without plucking, said, "Hold." The pressure shifted as if leveling itself. The rooms felt more like rooms. The iron will cooled a degree. The seam above, somewhere up in the barn's underfloor, learned what it sounds like when humans come to work. Boot, boot, pause. Hammer. Breath. The barn made a barn's agreeable reply. "What now?" Sylvie asked. "Now we go up," the keeper said, "and we make real work on purpose until the men either leave or become a kind of work themselves." They climbed. When the hatch lifted, the barn's air met them with the immediate smell of strangers, cologne gone sour under rain, cigarette in a pocket, leather that didn't belong here. The men stood framed by the big door's gap like a mistake choosing when to confess. The one with the trap laugh had a pry bar. The other had a flashlight that tried too hard to be useful. "Evening," the keeper said, in the tone that puts a chair between you and someone else without moving any furniture. "You have business?" The men both turned too fast to belong here. The second's flashlight snagged on the mica lantern and made a brief, bright marriage. "Ma'am," he said. Her aunt sent us. Said there was junk in the barn needed hauling." He pointed toward the stall, where the smallest of the chalk circles on the lid pretended to be a pebble. "Didn't expect to find basement." "My aunt doesn't hire strangers by dark," Sylvie said, grateful for the truth living under the sentence like a beam under a floor. "And she doesn't call me her." The first man shrugged, an ugly little dance his shoulders knew. "We can go," he said, but his eyes didn't mean it. They were matched pairs of copper doors with bruised coins on them. "What you hear," the keeper said to him gently, "is work you don't know how to do." "Meaning?" "Meaning it isn't yours." He shifted his grip on the pry bar. "Funny thing, property," he said. "Belongs to whoever's touching it with the right tool." "Then you'll want a broom," the keeper said, and handed him one. It was a ridiculous act and therefore perfect. The barn recognized the grammar. The men did not. The second reached for the broom because a hand that doesn't know what to do will often accept the first chore offered if it sounds like the world. The first made a face because that is what pride does when given instructions that don't include praise. He lifted the pry bar another inch. The bell, which had not been rung, made the same small throat sound it had before, unasked. From directly beneath the lid, something answered in polite echo, a tiny bell, or a jar tapping back with bone. The men heard it. Humans are not complicated instruments. We put our ears where our fear tells us to. Both heads tilted. Both bodies leaned. "Don't promise weather," the keeper said, not to them. To Sylvie. Sylvie nodded because her mouth had been about to say, "It will be morning soon," which is the kind of sentence a hungry pattern can use as a staircase. Instead she took the broom back from the second man with a simple, "Thank you," and began to sweep the aisle between the stalls as if she meant to make a pride of her own out of clean straw. Work makes rooms behave. The goat settled into a less rhetorical posture. The maras breathed like ocean. The rain, outside, found a rhythm old barns teach when they don't want to scare anyone. The first man's pry bar looked more and more like a mistake his mother could have prevented by insisting he carry something better in his hands when he visited strangers. "We'll come back in daylight," he said, "because some people think they will agree with any plan if asked loudly." "You'll go where you belong in daylight," the keeper said. "Which I suspect isn't here." The second man, quiet, unreadable under the engine lid accent, surprised Sylvie by tipping his head half an inch in thanks. Then he touched his partner's elbow with a friend's precision, not a bully's, and directed him to the door with a pressure that knew facts about leverage beyond physics. They left. Gravel took their tires. The barn returned to its own climate. The keeper waited with the stillness of a person who knows that leaving is not finished until the idea of staying gives up too. Then she set the broom down and looked at the lid as if it were a child about to ask the wrong question. "It will try again," she said. "Because that's its language. Try again. Learn your seriousness by knocking. Offer to be useful in the worst possible way. It will use other mouths if you let it. It likes men who think property is a verb." "I can move the truck into the doorway," Sylvie said. "Block it. Sleep there. Bring the cot." "You can," the keeper allowed. "And we will keep watch by turns. But understand, doors are polite lies we tell ourselves about the world staying still. The only way to keep this door from moving is to teach the thing that it will starve if it keeps knocking." "How?" "We feed something else. You said bread later." "We feed work," the keeper said. "And we feed the rooms below an honest list." She lifted the ledger from the bench like a hymn book and pressed it, absurdly gently, into Sylvie's hands. "Your turn. Don't write names. Write what we do. Write only the verbs. Stones can't eat verbs." The pen the ledger wanted was the pencil that lived in its fold. Sylvie set the book on the bench, opened to the next blank square of a day, and wrote, "Sweep. Chalk. Tie. Listen. Descend. Spin. Hold. Refuse. Return. Breathe. She paused, and because her hand liked lists that ended with completion, she wrote, watch. The keeper nodded. Good. Save the rest for dawn. They kept watch. One on the cot, boots on, lamp within reach. One by the lid, hand on thread, bell cord looped around the wrist but loose. The barn taught them its night cracks and its mouse diaries. Once the scene below pushed a little and a wind came up through the iron with a smell like a river after a flood, silt, dead leaves, a note of something that has planned too far ahead. Sylvie thought the word no until her jaw hurt with it, and the seam sighed and sulked and shrank. Near morning, when darkness thinned to that special color that pretends not to care about light yet, the thread tugged once, polite. The bell made a throat sound, equally polite. The goat sneezed. The mares did a little dance with their ears. Everyone was awake. Down, the keeper said. On the second rung, Sylvie's palm met damp. The cold had sweated. The iron will thrummed under her skin like a pulse that had been taught manners for so long it forgot it had another speed. At the copper door the bruised coin still held, but the strap below it had learned a new song in the night. The pressure in that passage had become a lure. And now? Sylvie mouthed. We keep to the left, the keeper said, and when the left ended, we build a left. How do you build a left? You choose, the keeper said simply. You keep a hand on the cold side, and when the cold side grows warm you move your hand to where it is cold again, even if there is no wall yet. The corridor they took had no wall yet. It was a suggestion. It was the absence of the right hand's pressure drawn like a pencil line on a ghost map. The keeper walked first, hand out, feeling the cold as if it lived under skin. Sylvie followed, palm opened a stone that wasn't there and then was. The weft did not like this. The pressure from the copper door thickened, then coiled like smoke that meant to be rope. Sing, the keeper whispered. Sylvie put the jaw harp's pitch in her throat without the instrument, thought of river and rope and the words she had written in the ledger without anyone's names, and gave the passage not a melody but a pulse. The stone liked it. The cold drew itself where her hand asked. The left built itself, not quickly but enough. They reached a bend that had not been there before and felt the pressure drop behind them like a door, indignant, learning that someone had added a hallway to its house. What's ahead? Sylvie asked, because sometimes questions can tuck themselves behind caution like letters behind a postcard. An old room, the keeper said. Older than us. We borrowed it once when the river asked for our children. We promised to return it unaltered. We lied. The room had waited the way cellars wait when nobody remembers the apples they stored there. It had a roundness the other rooms lacked, and a domed ceiling whose bricks were laid in a stubborn spiral. In the center stood a column of stone with a shallow bowl on top. The bowl held nothing but dust. Around the column someone had carved words that weren't words, a lattice of lines that meant, simply, here. We made the mistake of pouring names into this bowl, the keeper said. We thought if we gathered them and held them, the weft couldn't have them. We were wrong. It liked them arranged almost as much as it liked them spoken. So now we pour verbs. She took the ledger from Sylvie, tore a blank page cleanly along its fold, a desecration that felt necessary the way breaking a crust does when you are starving, and handed Sylvie the pencil. Write what we will do next, and set it alight. Sylvie wrote, bar. Brace. Blind. She thought, then added, wait. The keeper touched the mica lamp to the corner of the page. It flared, obedient. The bowl accepted the ash the way a body accepts medicine it doesn't enjoy. The pressure in the walls, which had crept in after them like a trickle under a door, backed away a foot, then two. Not defeated. Respectful, for now, of people who brought their own list and didn't ask the room to make one for them. They went back to the iron wheel. They barred the copper door with two of the iron fishmouth hooks and a length of chain so the pressure had to go somewhere else if it wanted to be a river. They braced the stairs seam with a beam scavenged from a bench in the tools chamber, jammed under the lip so that if it widened it would have to lift the barn along with it. They blinded the little window in the copper door with a cloth dipped in the basin and pasted with clay and ash, so mimicry could not find even its own face to rehearse against. Then they waited. Waiting is work if you let it be. They listened to the barn translate itself into stone and back. They counted breath the way ledger writers count hours. They taught their hands not to reach for each other because comfort can be a door if you let hunger learn how it opens you. When morning finally presented itself through the barn slats, a pale, honest ribbon, a car door closed in the yard, and a voice that belonged to the world said, bright with friendship and worry, "You alive?" The name that belonged to the voice rose to Sylvie's tongue like a fish to bread. She caught it with her teeth before it broke the surface and made a mess of air. The keeper looked at her and said softly, "We must practice even with those we love." They went up. The barn smelled like the first step of a good day. A travel mug steamed in a hand Sylvie wanted to hug. A crowbar gleamed like a joke, loved, heavy with all the doors it had ever refused to be part of. "Hey, stranger," said the friend at the door, eyes scanning the barn with alert affection. "I brought in decent amounts of tea and also Jaffa cakes. And a shovel, because I refuse to show up to a mystery with just sugar." "So, what on earth did you find?" Sylvie's mouth moved before her plan did. "Work," she said. "I found work." "Work," the friend said, rightly skeptical, delighted anyway. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "Good. I brought my favorite verb." Behind them, under their feet, the iron will cooled another degree, as if a long, long breath had just been let out without anyone noticing. The chalk circles on the lid looked ordinary. The bell pretended it hadn't been anyone's throat. The keeper held the mica lantern very low so its light would not teach the morning about old fires. She stood just back of the friend's shoulder, the way a long habit stands behind a new one to check its spine. Her eyes were kind and complicated. Her hand, at her side, held a small square of black stone like a secret that didn't want to be heavier than its job. "Okay," the friend said. "Tell me where to stand. Tell me what to carry. Tell me the rules." Sylvie told her none of the rules, and all of them, by handing her a broom first. The day did what days do when two women and a keeper decide to bend it to work, it moved. They cleared the North Bay, stacking lumber by dimensions, not by the way a man with a truck likes to think about weight. They mended a strap hinge on the small door and did not discuss why it mattered that it swing without complaint. They took apart a section of rotten stall wall and discovered a cache of square nails hidden in an old tobacco tin by someone who had loved the idea of future repair. They put the nails in a clean jar on a shelf where they could be found by anyone who spoke the language of jars. At noon the friend disappeared to the farmhouse and returned with sandwiches cut on the diagonal, because some kindnesses are geometry, and thermoses sweating reassurance. The keeper accepted tea in a cup that had once known parish socials and now met stone, and closed her eyes when the heat touched her mouth like confession. They did not mention the lid. They did not name the seam. They did not admire the way the chalk circles resisted being erased by boot scuffs because admiration is a door when you are not careful. By late afternoon the friend had learned the barn's walk like a dance and had a right to be told a thing. The keeper looked to Sylvie. Sylvie nodded, not because she had earned the right to tell, but because she had earned the understanding that no telling would be clean. They took the friend to the hatch. They let her lean and feel the cold lifting. They said none of the words that hurt lungs. They said only the verbs. "Hold," Sylvie said. "Refuse," the keeper said. "Listen," the friend said, surprising them, proving something good about the way love learns languages by ear. They showed her the first chamber and not the others. Jars can be explained. Ledgers can be given a page to hold. Copper doors cannot be trusted with a third pair of eyes on a first day. When the light slanted oily gold through the rafters and the goat rehearsed opinions about dinner, the friend looked at the keeper, then at Sylvie, then at the iron wheel, and said the sentence that had been waiting all day. "What happens if it wins?" The keeper did not put sermon in her answer, only truth. "It doesn't win," she said. "It runs the house." "And if we win?" the friend asked. "Then we run the house," the keeper said. "And the house does not become a road. It stays a house." They ate on the threshold with plates on their knees and the radio behaving as if it had always liked old songs sung by women who mean it. The valley's evening laid itself down on the pasture like a quilt made of opinions older than anyone's grandfather. The friend told a story about a neighbor who tried to move a beehive and learned humility, and did not say the neighbor's name even once because some people don't have to be taught rules to honor them. The bell did not ring. The thread did not tug. The iron will cooled enough that, for the first time since the lid had side open, the left spoke felt like an object, not a memory of someone else's hand. After the friend left, promising to return with biscuits and a tarp, verbs, she shouted from the car. The keeper set the mica lantern back on the bench in the first chamber and turned to Sylvie with a look that wasn't a question, not exactly, but carried the shape of one. "We have to see what's beyond the copper," she said. "Not today. Not in the dark. But soon. Because it will keep asking. Because it has found a way to get the river's attention," the keeper said, and the way she said river made it a person who could live or die. "And because the ledger doesn't have a page for what happens when you refuse long enough. We wrote down everything we knew. Then we ran out of paper. So we write more. So we walk farther than the last of us did," the keeper said. "And we come back the same number of us who went." 3, then, Sylvie said, because she would not lie to the room about the friend. 3, the keeper agreed, which was a promise but not a name. "But before that, we have one more job." She touched the lid where the chalk circles had been and then, with a careful finger, drew a new circle that overlapped the others without completing the face. "We must teach it that faces are not doors." "How?" "We show it ours, and we do not answer when it tries to wear them." The knight settled with the dignity of an elder. The barn held. The animals believed what barns say at night when doors are well set and hay sweet and weather, unspecified, keeps to its own rooms. Below, in the stone, a breath learned 2 new facts about the house that had always been its favorite meal, that broom is a verb more powerful than pry, and that a jaw harp's single pitch can hold a wall up when a hymn might surrender and step through. In the small hours, when a person's body forgets on purpose how it stays attached to vigilance, Sylvie drifted into the edge of sleep and dreamed the river without banks and woke with her hand in the air where the cold side had been. The hand of the keeper, not asleep at all, found her wrist and lowered it gently. "Left," she said, so softly it might have been the word love in another house. Morning came on a wind from the east that brought the smell of bread without any actual bread in it. The friend arrived with biscuits and the promised tarp and a coil of new rope that had never been asked to be brave and so didn't show off. They fed the animals, made tea that lived up to its promises, and stepped down as 3 until the iron wheels cold kissed each of their palms in the order they preferred to be brave. At the copper door the cloth on the window had dried to a dull opacity. Behind it something breathed a conversation with itself and then, finding no partner, fell silent in a way that sounded like patience putting on a coat. The chain held. The fishmouth hooks held. The pressure did what rivers do when a new boulder is set in their way, found other banks to try. "We go to the round room," the keeper said, and when they reached it she placed the ledger on the column's bowl as if feeding the stone a book might nourish the right part of hunger. "Right," she said to the friend. "What? What we do next?" The friend thought for a time that the ledger allowed without feeling insulted. Then she wrote, "Admit. Ask. Anchor." She looked up, half apologizing. "I'm not very good at being vague." "You're perfect," the keeper said. "Anchor is the best word we have that isn't a promise." They took the right-hand path together, toward the copper, past the bruised coin. The keeper unhooked the chain with ceremony, not because the door needed ceremony but because they did. The fish mouths opened their iron smiles and let go. The pressure sang a little song of appetites. The cloth stayed on the window. "Palm," the keeper said to Sylvie, and Sylvie put her hand to the left spoke. "Palm," the keeper said to the friend, and the friend put her hand to the keeper's shoulder because sometimes palms are for people and not for metal. The keeper spun the wheel and the bolts came back like soldiers tired of standing straight. "This is the part," the keeper said, "where we do not let it teach us a story." The copper door opened inward, very slowly, as if the room on the other side had been doing its hair and needed a minute to feel presentable. The air that came to meet them had the lightest tang of something both like and unlike the river, old wet, yes, but saltire, like tears remembered, like an ocean that had once had an affair with the valley and kept the letters. Their lights drew a cone into the space beyond. It was larger than any of the rooms they had seen, and lower, and lined with shelves that held not jars or ledgers or tools but the spines of books that had never been printed. Hand-bound, some in leather, some in cloth, some in the rough, beautiful ugliness of burlap. Every spine bore an emblem rather than a title, a circle, a line, a pair of vertical marks, a diamond. No letters. The floor between the shelves was a careful mosaic of small, flat stones river-polished and set with the kind of patience that used to be cheap before batteries. Library, the friend breathed, and then clapped both hands over her mouth because a library is made of names, and she had just brought that fact to the threshold. It is where the Weft keeps what it learns when the world doesn't give it something better, the keeper said. We called it the Room of Spines. Because we were afraid to call it anything else. On the far wall, under a low arch, something moved. Not the pale coin pads. Not a person. Something like a sleeve of air with a weight hidden in it, passing from one shadow to another with such courtesy that you might not notice it if you didn't want to. It stopped at the edge of their light and became, obligingly, a shape that a person could talk to without feeling mad. It was a doorway. Not in the wall. In the room. It stood upright, a frame of dark wood whose grain ran in spirals that disagreed with gravity. Within the frame, nothing but the air of the library. But the air inside the frame was a fraction darker, a fraction slower, the way rain behind a window reads as different even when you know the glass is clean. The frame took a step. The friend grabbed Sylvie's sleeve without shame. The keeper lifted the jaw harp and plucked once, lightly. The single pitch went into the frame and came back as if it had been walked through a long hallway and needed to find itself again. Anchor, the keeper said, and they understood she meant their feet as well as their verbs. The frame took another small step. It did not hurry. It did not threaten. It did not pretend to be something else. It was a door that had learned to wear legs. It wants us to invite it, the keeper said, very calm. It is being very good. What happens if we do? The friend asked, equally calm because some people take the temperature of a room from the bravest person in it. It runs the house, Sylvie said, and heard her own voice something like a bell in it. The frame stopped. If a door can have disappointment, this one had it gracefully. It turned, yes, turned, and walked along the shelves toward the arch in the far wall, then dissolved into the shadow like smoke mating with night. Back, the keeper said. And they did, step by slow step, until the copper door closed itself between the library and them and the wheel could be spun and the bolts returned to their discipline. The pressure in the hall lightened the way air does after laughter you weren't sure you were allowed to have. They stood with their foreheads briefly touching the cold metal not because it was prayer but because it was practical. What now? The friend asked, and this time the question felt like a hand extended down a steep bit of path. Now, the keeper said. We leave a list the room can read without using a mouth. She looked at Sylvie. Right. Sylvie wrote on a page torn from the back of the ledger where no names lived, refuse. Anchor. Close. Return. She set the page on the floor in front of the copper door and put a small river stone on each corner to keep refusal from slipping. The pressure behind the door sniffed at the paper like a polite animal who could learn to respect fences. When they came up into the barn, the evening had already drawn itself into longer words. The friend should go. The keeper should go wherever the keeper went when she unpinned herself from 1918 and the rooms that remembered it. The goat had opinions that were not negotiable about dinner. The Maras wanted their hands of hay and their long strokes down the blaze. Tomorrow, the friend said, and when she saw Sylvie flinch she corrected herself without being told. Next. We will do more work next. The keeper set a palm to the north post that had seen more of the valley's sentences than any book. You will hear it knock tonight, she said. It will wear your voice and my voice in hers. It will ask for bread in a way that reminds you of a winter that almost took your mother. It will promise weather in a tone you think you can control. You will want to talk to it because you are kind. Sylvie looked down at her hands, the fingers gritty with chalk and clay, the river meadows ghost cold still inside her palm, the jaw harp's single pitch resting in her throat like a decision that might be permanent. I won't. You might, the keeper said, without blame. But you will stop. And when you do, it will stop. And then it will find a thinner wall. She lifted the mica lantern and tucked it into the curve of her elbow like a small child who didn't like strangers. I will be where walls go to practice being walls. Where's that? The friend asked, bold, polite. The keeper smiled with her eyes and let her mouth refuse. Left, she said, and stepped back onto the ladder as if it were a piano's octave she had known since girlhood. The light slid with her. The iron lid breathed once. The black stone pressed cool into Sylvie's hand like a friend. They set the truck in the doorway and strung a line of bells from the rafters to the post to the cot like a necklace that wanted to be an alarm. They wrote verbs on a page and put it under the plate on the table so the barn could read without anyone listening. They ate soup that made their throats feel like rooms with doors that fit. Midnight, a knock. Not on the lid. Against the window glass. Sylvie woke with her heart already standing up and went to the kitchen with the jaw harp in her pocket and the river in her hand. The knock came again. A small one. A child's. The porch light showed nothing but weather behaving. The third knock sounded like it came from the door but answered the floor. She stood in the threshold and held very still and said, in the tightest inside voice possible, hold. Silence answered, and then the smallest voice, not hers, not anyone's, said through the wood, please. It was the voice of a child who had learned to say the right thing to open doors. It made every warm part of her want to start a fire. She put the jaw harp's frame between her teeth and plucked once. The single pitch went through the door into the house and out again into the yard and down into the stone and came back carrying the shape of night. The voice did not repeat. The wood relaxed under her hand like a dog who has just been told kindly that no, it is not bedtime for walks. She slept again. The bells did not ring. The goat dreamed his ridiculous dreams and bleated as if he'd just invented donkeys. The maras breathed like paragraphs an author is going to get right this time for sure. At dawn, she woke to an absence so loud it shouted. The iron lid sat softly in its collar, as if a hand had stroked it once during the night to thank it for tolerating a visitor. The chalk circles had been carefully wiped with a damp finger and then redrawn in the wrong order, small, large, medium. The bell's clapper was tied with a tiny bow in white thread you could only see if you were the kind of person who sees thread anywhere. And on the bench, next to the ledger, lay the cloth they had pasted over the copper door's window. It had been set there neatly, so respectfully it hurt. Beneath it, the ledger had been opened to a page nobody had written yet. In pencil, in a hand that had learned from many hands how to look like it belonged here, someone had written 3 words. Admit. Ask. Anchor. The friend's verbs, returned to them like a question. Sylvie felt the river in her palm go cold enough to bite. She looked at the ladder hatch, at the door to the yard, at the place where the seam in the stair had learned to measure daylight, and she understood in the tender bones behind her teeth that the weft had done what patterns do when you starve them of a meal but allow them to sit at the table. It had learned their handwriting. She reached for the bell cord to make it say twice without words what anyone who could read work would understand. The bell did not move. Between her fingers and the rope, something invisible tugged back, not hard, not cruel, just curious, as if to ask, how strong are you? The keeper's voice came from below, urgent and dry. Left. Sylvie pulled, and the bell answered, and the ladder's oak took up the sound, and the iron will cooled in a way that said the river had smelled a different bank. She ran. Down the ladder. Through the first chamber where the jars trembled as if their bones wanted to do language. Past the iron wheel, which thrummed in its cold so fiercely it felt like summer holding back a storm. To the copper door, where the window, unblind, showed nothing and also everything, the shape of a room rehearsing how to be a door with legs again. The keeper stood in the library's threshold, jaw harp in her teeth, black stone in one hand, the other palm out. The frame stood in the aisle between the shelves like a polite visitor who has just been told a house rule he does not yet understand. It wrote on the ledger, Sylvie said, breathless, and heard the way the sentence fed names without saying any. It wrote verbs. It asked to be taught, the keeper said around the harp. The worst kind of hunger. The frame took a step. It had learned their patience. It had learned how to ask. It had learned how to write. Back, the keeper said to Sylvie, but Sylvie did not go. You don't back away from your own handwriting. She stepped forward instead, into the aisle, river metal cold in her fist, jaw harp's one note resting in her throat like a held breath, and put her palm out to the place where air inside the frame was darker by a fraction than the air that belonged to the room. Anchor, she said. The frame stopped as if the word were a hand on its chest. For half a heartbeat the room believed in a world where a verb could be a lever. And then, from somewhere beyond the shelves, in the shadow under the arch, in the stack of spines without titles, in the memory of a scene that like daylight, the voice of the river came into the library the way a parent's voice comes into a room where children are building a fort out of chairs and rules. It didn't say a word. It made a sound like stones shifting underwater. The frame turned its head, not that it had a head, toward that sound and lifted one leg, not that it had legs, and took a step that did not belong to any of their rules. The copper door swung itself half shut with a feeling like a lung spasming, and the wheel jumped in Sylvie's palm. We're out of ledger, the keeper said, voice level, eyes bright with something that could have been fear or could have been praise for a student doing something extremely difficult in the first hour of class. She opened her mouth to say the next verb. And the frame moved. Straight through the door toward them. Them. The word shattered against the copper door like a bead of rain hurled against glass at the instant the pane decides to learn how to breathe. The frame moved as if it had been waiting for permission none of them had given, one smooth step, another, not fast but inevitable, the way a tide crosses a sandbar once it learns the mathematics of the moon. Its dark lintel caught the lantern's mica light and bent it, not with malice, with physics. The light went through and came out slower, like a song sung backward by someone who remembers the words but won't pronounce them. Sylvie lifted the jaw harp's single pitch in her throat and found it meeting the frame the way water meets a post-sunken riverbed. The sound made eddies around the moving wood. It didn't stop it. The black river stone was cold in her hand to pain, a clarity that chose her bones over her skin. Beside her, the keeper held her palm out, fingers spread, and the air consented to know what a wall meant. Anchor, Sylvie said again, and this time she did not make a sound with it. She slotted the word into herself like a tool into a handle, a snug fit made of practice, and felt her heels weight the mosaic floor in the room of spines as if the stones had grown used to taking orders from feet. She saw, as if from above her own head, the vector of the frame's intent, how it had mapped their breaths, how it carried copies of their patience in its knotwood heart, and she looked at it with the dignity she would give a neighbor's child who had made a dangerous thing feel inevitable simply because he was young and curious. The frame paused. That was all. A pause held in the hinge place between its steps. It felt the way animals feel when they consider, for a living second, not doing what their bodies tell them to do. The keeper plucked the harp once, gently, and the pitch touched the pause and made it ring rather than rush. Back, she said, not to Sylvie, not to the friend standing a pace behind, hands ready. Back, not away. They moved in the only direction that wasn't surrender. They stepped backward like dancers who had practiced with their eyes closed, letting the air between their chests and the frame stay a steady arm's length even as the library tried to use perspective as leverage. The frame's legs, there were no legs and yet there were, took one more step and stopped with the courtesy of a caller who knows the house but refuses to cross the rug without invitation. Behind the frame, between two shelves, the shadow under the low arch shifted again. Waterstone sound, apparent coming down a hallway, passed through the panel dark like a rumor concerned with accuracy. The frame inclined its top rail toward that sound in what Sylvie could only translate as deference. It had learned deference, and that was almost worse than hunger, it meant it had been practicing hierarchy. The keeper took the black stone from Sylvie's hand and did something unkind and necessary. She pressed it to the library's threshold stone, just the corner, just enough to score a small, mean notch in the edge of the mosaic. The sound was like Flint remembering what sparks cost. "House," she said, not to the room. To herself. To Sylvie. To the friend. "We run the house." The notch did nothing to the frame. It did something to the air. The library remembered itself as a room before a road. The shelves held their breath not in fear but in inventory. The symbols on the cloth spines, the circle, the verticals, the diamond, seemed to slacken in invisible readiness, like fists unclenching underground. The river's sound under the arch moved closer and then stilled, the way a large thing becomes as small as possible when it does not wish to scare the smaller things it loves. The friend, patient, brave, not a name in the air to feed the weft, found the seam of courage in the moment before panic notices there's a ladder behind it. "Hold," she said softly, and she didn't mean us or it or the door. She meant time. The word took a seat and waited, reasonable as a neighbor on a front step. Sylvie's mind wanted its old bad habit, narrative, weather, promise, like a tongue worried for a missing tooth. She let the wanting exist and refused to hire it. She breathed and counted and felt the thread of the left-hand wall humming in her palm even here, far from the wheel, far from the chalk marks, because left is a discipline more than a wall. The frame gave them a courtesy they had not earned and did not trust. It turned. It turned away from the copper door, away from the threshold, away from them, and walked back into the long aisle between spines, deeper, toward the arch where the river's sound had tied its breath into quiet. "Close," the keeper said. Sylvie and the friend spun the wheel together as if they had always been meant to share that work. The bolts slid home without their usual conversation. The door accepted the closure as if it would keep it. The pressure at their backs folded like a tent taking down its own poles before weather had a chance to lie about being calm. They stood in the hall between iron and the ledger room and listened to their kneecaps admit they were attached to bodies. The keeper lowered the harp, the cord shining dull where breath had wet it. "It will learn a new trick," she said. It did not insist. "So it will try a novel." "A what?" the friend asked, amused in a terrified way that improved everything. "A trick that takes more than a page," the keeper said. "Come." In the ledger room, the book lay where they had left it, the page with the friend's verbs weighted by river stones like good corners on a map. Sylvie's fingers hovered over the pencil. She had to fight the itch to write names just to see them trapped, pinned, preserved. "Verbs," she told the itch. "We feed it verbs." She wrote, "Close." "Return." "Anchor." "Watch." The keeper nodded and turned to the jars. The bones inside had trembled when she and Sylvie last ran past, a subtle clicking like rain in oak leaves. Now they lay quiet in their nests of thread and wax. The keeper touched each lid with 2 fingers, not to bless, to read. "Untouched," she said. "It wants to be seen as civilized." "Isn't that worse?" Sylvie asked. The breath beast she had seen in the copper window, the coin pads in the stair, the polite drawing of a child's triangle house, the accumulation of manners was more alarming than violence. Violence you could brace for. Politeness crept inside your rules and ate them from the center out. "It is more dangerous," the keeper agreed. "And also our only chance." "How?" the friend asked. "Because it means it wants our approval," the keeper said, and the gentleness in her voice made the hair on Sylvie's arms lift. "As long as it does, we can make a rule it will court." "What rule?" "The one we wish we had built first," the keeper said, and Sylvie saw, in the bright stillness that followed, every year the woman had carried this idea around like a locked coal. The keeper exhaled once, not tired, deliberate. "We make a rule that says, no road may be a house unless a house says yes. We say yes by work." "It can't eat work," the friend said. "Not if we don't let it." "It can imitate." "Then we make work it cannot imitate," Sylvie said, and the words came out of her in a tone she recognized but had never heard from her own mouth. "We make work that is plain and dumb-looking to anything that isn't human, and we make it over and over until it can't distinguish the work from loving." The keeper smiled the smallest smile it is possible for a face to manage without missing the point. "Good," she said. "Bring the plane and the broom and the auger. Bring the ledger. And the harp." We go upstairs. They went, and the wheel was cold under Sylvie's hand again, really cold, cold, like a faucet finally finding its well. The barn received them with a light that felt peeled rather than poured. Morning had separated fully from night and was busy on its list. The animals did the work animals do without worrying whether anyone noticed. The friend set the thermos by the post and looked at the keeper, then at Sylvie, then at the lid. "Tell me where to stand," she said as if she had always said it. "Here," the keeper said, and placed her on the north side of the hatch where the draft came up like a breath that had remembered all its exercises. "Sweep when you hear anything that sounds like curiosity." "And me?" Sylvie asked, although she already knew. The black stone kissed her palm with a pulse no heartbeat could own. The plane's wooden body fit her hand like a family story. The broom leaned against the post as if it had always been the only polite weapon in a barn. "You name the tools," the keeper said. "To me." To her. Never to the seam. They made work. They planed a board that had been waiting for years to stop being the wrong thickness. The plane's mouth murmured shavings in a long language that the frame could not imitate because the frame, for all its appetite, had never loved a splinter enough to sing it. They swept the aisle not because straw out of place was a threat, because order is a kind of left hand you can keep on a wall when the wall is feelings. They broke stale bread and ate it with butter standing up, and even the butter, yellow as a story of spring, helped, because fat is the most honest promise food makes. They did not say the friend's name. They did not say the keeper's. They did not say whether, though the sky worked very hard to be announced. Clouds clabbered over the ridge and the cedar line shivered and a hawk rode a clean line between two uncertainties. They kept to verbs, and the barn cooperated by being plain. Tiredness came not like a thief but like a responsible guest, knocked, waited, accepted a chair when offered. They took turns on the cot and on the post. The bell hung there like a star in daylight and minded its business. Once, just as the friend's broom found a rhythm that could have grown into a tune by accident, the keeper's hand covered hers and stilled it. "A single pitch," she reminded. "No melody." They held the line until the day leaned. The shadow of the house climbed its own wall. Light pooled in the bucket to its mark and made the water look like something you could own without having to pay. The valley settled into its evening grammar. Then the frame knocked. Not the lid. Not the copper. The frame, wherever it had set its legs, knocked on something that could carry the knock through the tunnel and up the ladder and into the bell cord like an old roomer finding a new widow. The bell made its small throat sound, and the goat did his polite version of panic, 2 stamps, 1 sneeze, an authoritative munch. "Stay to the work," the keeper said, barely above breath. The friend leaned the broom against her shoulder like a rifle in a painting. "Sweep," she said to the air, and swept. Sylvie took the plane to the board, set the sole, and said, "Lead." The blade bit. The shaving curled. The barn understood. The bell settled like a sleepwalking child being steered around a hazard by a mother who did not turn on the lights. The knock came again. It had learned their pattern and now it appealed on the offbeat, when the plane lifted, when the broom turned, when the ledger took a breath between strokes. The keeper looked at the post as if it were an old friend and said, "Face. A gift to the wood." The post stopped absorbing the knock like sympathy and started handling it like structure. The third knock arrived and went nowhere of interest. "Good," the keeper said. Again. They held the line through twilight. The radio, respectful, offered thin music and then lost the station, and then the jaw harp's pitch carried the shape of a song without promises long enough that the frame either learned boredom or learned limits. The bell slept. The friend went to the farmhouse to fetch stew and came back with shame on her face and laughter under it. "I almost said the sky," she confessed. "When I saw it. You know that line it makes at this hour. I almost said it out loud." "One is not sin," the keeper said, with the mercy of a woman who remembers when the world felt first. "What you feed it is all that matters." They ate and washed their bowls in a discipline that belonged to grandmothers and people who have discovered why grandmothers live long. Night took the yard and set the house in its little square of warm like a lantern refusing to abandon a porch. "Down," the keeper said at last, not because anything demanded. Because the ledger's page needed more verbs than upstairs could teach. They took the ladder into the earth. The wheel cooled their palms. The jar's bones rested. The lunch tin planet gleamed. The iron door admitted them with the satisfaction of a trustworthy thing. The hall ran ahead and behind. The seam in the stair had not reopened, the beam braced against it had a lazy posture that means a job is holding. At the copper door the pressure did not lean. It listened. It had learned that listening was the way to grow fat in a house that thought itself a church. Library, the keeper said, and spun the wheel. Anchor. The room of spines looked as it had. The frame was not in the aisle. The arch did not move. The books bore their good emblems, circle, diamond, twin marks. Sylvie's lamp flipped a shadow to the far corner where the mosaic's pattern broke and resumed with an honesty that said, "Someone repaired this once, and did it quickly, and did it well." The keeper set the ledger on the column in the round room and then did something she had not yet done in Sylvie's company. She removed the jaw harp and passed it to the friend. "Your teeth are young," she said. "Hold the pitch. I'm going to speak to it in the only language it hears without turning it into road." "What language is that?" Sylvie asked, and then knew. The keeper stroked the column as though checking a fever. She took a breath, placed her lips close to the bowl, and said 3 times the word that isn't a word, the syllable patterns mothers anywhere in the world use when a child has stuffed panic down into hiccups, "Hush, hush, hush." The bowl took the hush and spread it. The shelves, which had been holding their breath perfectly, exhaled like a congregation realizing a benediction is not a dismissal. The tiles underfoot listened with a discipline that made Sylvie love whoever had set them. "Hush," the keeper said again, softer, and then to Sylvie, "Name me tools." A litany, then, in a room that wanted titles and would be given only uses. "Plane," Sylvie said. "Soul. Mouth. Shave. Handle. Broom," the friend said around the harp's quiet pitch. "Straw. Bind. Sweep. Corner. Auger," Sylvie said. "Lead. Flute. Shank. Rope," the friend, lay. "Twist. Lay. Harp," the keeper said, gently taking it back to touch the frame of it like a promise she could keep because it was small. "Hold." The frame came then, not marching, not pretending to hire itself to them, simply appearing in the aisle as if it had always stood there and they had just noticed. It did not step. Not at first. It matched their hush by becoming quiet, not empty. It reached the only conclusion a mimic's body can supply when given the choice between noise and pattern. It settled on pattern. "I see you," the keeper said, to it, to the room, to the river under the arch, to the young and old women beside her. "We will tell you what a house permits." The frame flickered. The arch tensed. The room waited. "A house permits work," the keeper said. "It permits rest. It permits bread. It does not permit roads that do not knock." The frame took a half step forward and stopped with that courtesy again, as if it were genuinely trying. It had learned doors from doors. It had learned manners from women. It had learned hunger from everything. "Anchor," Sylvie said, and felt her voice find a depth she hadn't prepared for. The black stone in her pocket cooled through denim as if assisting. The frame eased backward as if tested by a tide. The arch under which the river listened made a conversation of stone shifting wet, and she felt, almost, a second witness, a bend in the river's own run, tilt to hear. The valley loved its own work, perhaps the river did, too. The keeper did something that frightened Sylvie as much as it reassured her. She stepped to the shelf on her left, selected a spine with 2 vertical marks on its cloth, and slid the book free. She held it, felt its weight the way a baker knows dough. Then she opened it, not to words, because there were none, but to blank pages stitched with thread darkened by fingers and time. On the first page, in pencil a cautious hand had written one thing, a circle, small. On the second, a line. On the third, 2 small verticals. The book was a primer of emblems. L. The initial made itself in Sylvie's mind without her mouth's betrayal. The keeper's face did not move. But something in her shoulders recognized being recognized. I finished it when she couldn't, the keeper said. Not apology, not pride. But I didn't start it. She taught the room to speak shapes when words were too expensive. She took the pencil from the ledger and drew, on the next blank page in the emblem book, a square. A small one, plain. Then she drew inside the square another square, offset by a hair's width. A house, she said to the frame. Inside a house. The frame held utterly still as if it had decided to be picture frame rather than door for the length of one breath. The keeper turned the page. Drew a circle inside a circle. Bread inside a bowl, she said. The only road allowed in a kitchen. The frame made the smallest tilt, consent or comprehension. She turned the page. Drew a diamond inside a diamond. A promise inside a promise. Do not step. The frame did not step. The river's sound under the arch did not commend or object. It waited. Rivers wait with an authority that has nothing to do with patience and everything to do with time's job requirement. What else? The friend whispered, the pitch of the harp steady enough that the hush of the bowl could sit in it like a chair. Left, Sylvie said suddenly, and the keeper's head turned. She had drawn already what needed to be drawn, and now Sylvie could see the gap in the primer that made this chapter possible. She took the pencil. Drew a line along the page's margin. Then she drew a hand, palm open, touching the line and moving along it. A childish little picture with her adult steadiness in the stroke. Left, she said to the frame. Hand on the cold side. She turned the page. Drew the same palm, the same line, and this time drew tiny cues, a shading to mean frost, a nothing at the end of the line to mean, build more wall and the hand will find it. The frames inside grew a fraction darker, then lighter, then settled. If it could have nodded, it would have. Again, the keeper said, a teacher's good hunger in it. Draw what a house permits when a road knocks correctly. They filled a dozen pages. In symbol and onomatopoeia and infantile drawing. Bowl within bowl. Bed within room with door within house. Rope turned into knot but knot that can be untied by hands that have learned, not teeth that want. Broom bristles laid flat because a broom standing upside down is a threat to any kitchen. A jar with a lid and the lid asks you to say, not today. A window with a curtain drawn because the valley isn't a stage. And the thing no one had drawn for the room before, a porch with a bench. Outside the house. Allowing looking without allowing inside. The friend drew that with a tender competence that made the river under the arch make a sound like stone agreeing to moss. The porch, the keeper said, and her voice did something that made Sylvie want to weep and laugh. Good. We will give it the porch. To the frame? To the valley, the keeper said, and closed the book. If the road needs a place to practice not coming in, we give it a porch. We do not give it our kitchen. The frame took one step backward. Another. It moved like an idea turning into law in a town hall with a quorum of reluctant but conscientious men. The arch's shadow thinned. Then the frame did a thing none of them expected, it bowed. Not deep. Enough. Then it walked into the long aisle and was gone like a secret that has learned it prefers being an open truth with rules. Sylvie didn't realize she had been shaking until her knees said about their small complaint. The friend let the harp's pitch fade and made a little sound that a child makes when a story turns the page and everything might be all right after all. The keeper pressed the heel of her hand to her sternum as if to slow her heart gently by example. We will not always be so lucky, she said. But we have bought an hour. An hour for what? The friend asked. For the part that is hardest, the keeper said. We go to the round room and write the rule. Then we go upstairs and live it so loudly the valley can't pretend it didn't hear. They stood around the round room's column as if it were a table where contracts are signed by hands that make moral weight. The ledger lay open, the emblem book beside it, the black stone on the bowl's lip like a dark moon. The keeper took the pencil, then looked at Sylvie and passed it to her instead. Your barn, she said. Your mouth. The pencil felt both heavier and lighter than any pencil had ever felt, a paradox she recognized as the exact sensation of adulthood when it stops play-acting and starts working a shift. Sylvie wrote, "A house is not a road." She paused, considered, and added, "A road may stop outside a house." She drew a little porch next to the words so the rule could read its own plain illustration. Then, in a breath she didn't know she had held, she wrote, "We say yes by work." She set the page alight and let the bowl eat the ash. The bowl glowed with the not light that fire leaves behind in stone. The arch's shadow moved in subtle, consenting ways. The library behind them exhaled the kind of quiet that does not pretend to be empty. The keeper touched Sylvie's knuckles with a gratitude so exact it felt like payments balanced. "Good," she said, and the small laugh under the word made the room expand one person wider. "Now we learn what trouble looks like on a porch." They closed the copper. The wheel received closing like habit that had been taught why it mattered. The iron did likewise. They climbed the ladder with the ledger and the emblem book wrapped in oilcloth because some rules want to see daylight to take harder root. Upstairs, the barn smelled like straw and old rope and a little like triumph, which is a smell you should always keep small, the way you keep a candle out of wind. They built a porch. They did not nail boards to the barn. They set a rectangle of space in front of the hatch and named it by use. They placed a bench there, a plank on two sawhorses, that was all, and honored it by not sitting on it except when speaking to the space below. They drew a square in chalk around the lid and then drew another square around that and made the line between them wide like a threshold. They put the broom against one post and the plane against another and the auger on the bench and the ledger open to a page with verbs written in tidy human hand. The friend made tea, not for them, for the room, and set the cup on the bench's edge where no one would reach for it by accident. The steam went up like a refrain. Then they worked again. Not in anxiety now. In conviction. The valley outside the door did all its valley work, the hawk rode its royal air, the distant road chested a truck over a hill with the patience of a mule, somebody far off burned brush and apologized to air with a rake. Inside, the barn made a sound like a woman humming without notes while she mends something old into a new thing that remembers the old thing kindly. Near noon, a car turned into the drive the way some cars do when they belong. Not sneaking. Not performing. The ant. Sylvie felt an old small fear rise, the kind your body learns in childhood and carries like a roll of coins in a pocket for emergencies. Names are doors, and her aunt had never seen a reason to close her mouth when she loved you. "Let me," the friend said, merciful and mischievous. She went down the ladder to the yard and met the older woman halfway to the barn with a hug that ended gossip before it started. From the bench, Sylvie watched through the big door as her aunt's hands did what hands do when they want to name things. They opened, they pointed, they covered her mouth, they touched the friend's cheek, they made circles in the air and then little lines like the edges of a porch. The friend spoke only verbs. The aunt, after a minute, spoke only verbs back the way you do when someone you trust hands you a tool and doesn't explain it, just uses it in front of you until your wrists learn. In the barn, the bell made the smallest joy noise. Not ring. Not warning. The plunk a bowl makes when a child's spoon finally lands true in soup. The aunt climbed the ladder and took in the square of chalk and the bench and the tea and the plane and the broom with the alert solemnity of a parishioner visiting a church without sanctimony, only meaning. Her eyes went soft when they landed on the ledger. "Your mother would have liked that the pencil lives there," she said, and the sentence did not feed anything hungry because the valley already knew those names, it had eaten their weather long ago and had the decency to keep quiet about it. The keeper regarded the aunt with a kind of familial strangerliness that meant, "I have heard of you in the ledger and in the ways the barn remembers who opens which doors how. You will need to learn not to say sky," she said gently. "I can do that," the aunt said. "I can call it light." She set her fingers on the bench and then removed them and put them on the chalk line instead because posts and edges and thresholds matter even when you don't grow up where they did. "What is this?" "A porch," the friend said, pride and humility exactly balanced like a board on sawhorses. "A porch," the aunt repeated, delighted. "We could have used a porch in '82. They laughed, and laughter spelled nothing the frame could borrow. Afternoon raised its heat until iced tea suggested itself and then forgot its own good idea, and still they worked, and under them the rooms held. When the knock came this time, it did not come with hunger or mimicry. It came with, this was new, a question in it. The bell sounded and then sounded again, and between the two notes there was a smaller effort, like a child trying to say your name without swallowing half the syllables. Down, the keeper said. House to porch. They descended together, the three of them, the ant, too, because sometimes you have to teach the rule to as many bodies as it will accept in a day. The wheel cooled their palms with respect, not test. The copper door rested, not pouting. The stairs seemed staid domestic. In the first chamber the jars were steadfast as always, the bones lay arranged as if a song had been set aside for later on purpose, not interrupted. In the hall beyond the iron, midway to the library, a new space had opened, a small square just big enough to be uncomfortable for liars. It had a low ceiling and a floor set with mosaic stones that had leapt off the library's floor for this. The shape of the room was, there was no mistaking it, a porch. No walls. Just the suggestion of house behind and the suggestion of road ahead and the certain fact of a place between where a conversation can learn not to ruin a day. The frame stood in the road, the arch behind it, the library before. It had not crossed the chalk they had drawn in the barn, it had drawn its own chalk down here because mimicry, once taught, prefers to be helpful. The keeper set the emblem book on the square's edge and opened it to the porch drawing. She turned the book around so the frame could see. Here, she said. This is the porch. This is where roads practice not coming in. The frame stood in a way a person stands when they honestly want to learn, shoulders back, hands not in pockets. It did not have shoulders. It had the idea of them now. The ant did something wonderful. She sat on the floor of the porch and patted the stones beside her. Come sit, she said, and then did not move to make room. The invitation remained. The lack of accommodation remained. The rule existed and did not pander. The frame took half a step, set its inside air over the porch's first stone, and stopped. It had learned borders. It breathed. The river under the arch sang a syllable of agreement, the kind old men make when a boy finally learns to put the tool back on the pegboard in the shape painted there for it when his grandfather was his age. Good, the keeper said. Now we will give it what it wants that does not belong to the kitchen. What does it want? The friend asked. Stories, the keeper said. They always want stories. She set the jaw harp between her teeth and plucked one pitch, then set the harp down. We will give it ours, and this is important, without names and without weather and without the promise that stories have to make sense in the morning. House stories. Porch stories. Work stories. Bread stories. The ant began. Of course she did. That was her birthright. She told the story of the time a mule decided it liked the front steps but not the door and the way the house learned to honor that, because some thresholds belong to animals more than to people. She told the frame a story of a roof patched in kitchen heat because the men had forgotten to tell the women where they were going, and the women did not need to wait to keep a house dry. She painted with verbs and kept her nouns inside, all of them chained to memory that would not leak into the seams. Sylvie told one, too, before she knew she wanted to. A simple one about a drawer that always stuck until you learned to lift as you pulled. She made the right shape with her hand and watched the frame, not trying to imitate, but to understand. The friend, laughing silently at herself, told a story about a tarp caught in a wind that was not named and how two people held its mad corners until it learned the tent it could be instead of the kite it wanted to become. They spoke until the porch grew warm with attention. The frame stood without asking for admittance because some part of it had learned what its job could be if it wanted the house to like it. Then, because the valley is patient but not a supplicant, the river under the arch asked the question. It did not use words. It used the noise stones make when they are on the move, downstream noises, not flood noises, and the smell of wet bank and alder leaf. The question was simple: will you keep the porch in storms? The keeper did not answer for the house. She looked at Sylvie. A gift and a dare passed again. Yes, Sylvie said, and the word was the kind of promise you can make without feeding a hungry thing, because it was backed by hands and a broom and the ledger and a bench, and by work a river had seen for 100 years performed without applause. We will keep the porch in storms. The river made the sound rivers make when someone good says something right to them. The frame lowered itself another fraction onto the first 2 porch stones and then stopped. Good, learning, honest. They brought the emblem book upstairs and set it open on the bench so the page with the porch would see weather without being told its name. The aunt went home, full of verbs, sated in the right way. The friend slept on the cot with her hand around the bell rope as if it were a child's hand crossing a street. The keeper slept where walls practice, wherever that was. Sylvie slept with the broom's handle across her lap like a borrowed staff that belonged in a larger story and had chosen to visit hers. The night did what nights do when rules are new, it prodded every joint to see if any would give. The bell plucked itself once at midnight, once at 2, once at 4, each time a different character knocking, polite neighbor, whether without a permit, a child who had learned that please can be theft if you aim it right. Each time the porch held. Each time Sylvie or the friend or both sat up and said a verb into the dark, and the dark sat down and thought about it. Dawn threaded the barn with gold cotton. The ledger lay open. The pencil waited. Sylvie wrote, keep, teach, watch. Then, with a small flourish she had not permitted herself before because pride can be a door, she wrote, build. They had bought themselves not merely an hour. They had bought a day. The porch held even when the frame arrived before noon with a new trick. It had learned to carry a second frame within itself like nesting dolls, an inner rectangle of darker air that sought to be an inside. The friend put a hand on the bench and said, with a joy that was not self-satisfied but accurate, 2 squares, and the room learned to recognize that delight as house speech, not invitation. In the afternoon, while the friend laid in another row of jars with square nails sorted by length and the aunt pinned an oilcloth curtain to the inner stall door to remind herself and anyone with mouths that sometimes you can make a room private without calling it secret, the knock returned, not from below this time, but from the yard. A truck. Familiar. The 2 men. Sylvie's lips stiffened at her own previous fear like a scar noticing rain. The friend stood at her shoulder. The aunt fetched the broom without being told. The keeper, who had no right to know when trucks returned in centuries she hadn't promised to live through, appeared from the ladder, jaw harp at the ready. The men stood in the barn door with hats and hands that didn't like hats. The second looked different, a person who has decided to study rather than steal. The first looked the same, now anxious about being seen as unchanged. We came, he said without preface, to ask if you needed help moving anything heavy. The sentence could have been a pretext if you said it the wrong way on a table. The keeper said it right by not moving at all. The friend smiled the particular smile that keeps doors from becoming roads. The aunt rapped the broom once against her palm like a judge with a very small gavel. We don't, Sylvie said. But we have work. Work that offers a porch for listening. The second man's eyes went to the chalk square around the lid. He did not step over it. He took off his hat all the way this time. We can listen, he said. My mother had rules about thresholds. Then mind them, the aunt said, not unkind. They did. They listened. They did not name weather. They accepted tea. They watched the ledger refuse to notice them. They saw the emblem book open to a porch and did not ask what language it was written in. The first man's shoulders sat down an inch when he realized being allowed to stand in a doorway without being admitted was not punishment, not yet. Sometimes the porch is enough, the keeper said to Sylvie later under her breath, out of the side of her mouth the way women barter secrets without spending them. Sometimes the porch saves a life that the kitchen would have ruined. By evening, they had established rights that felt like habit born in a single day: sweep, plane, auger, listen, refuse, feed, hold, anchor, porch. The house learned them. The road learned not to starve when it did not eat what it wanted. The river paced under the arch like a big dog that loves its noisy family and pretends otherwise. Night returned, as is its way, with a gift, a storm that believed in itself. Wind found the cedar hedge and taught it new vowels. The roof tasted its old seams and bragged. the animals made the tiny movements that reveal the line between fear and attention. The bell did not ring. It waited to learn if the porch would do its work. The first strike of lightning chased itself through the mica lantern, through the iron hinge, down the chain, into the beam bracing the seam, into the mosaic under the copper, into the river, into the hill, and out into the world through outlets the ledger could not reasonably be expected to inventory. The second strike came with a voice in it, not thunder's honest malice, but another voice. The frame. It knocked with the storm at its back. It asked. Now, the keeper said. Now we learn if the rule holds when the world is loud. They went down together, for, now, the ant would not be kept upstairs, holding the rope, the broom, the emblem book, the stone. The iron will cool them despite the heat outside like a fever conscious of an old lake. The copper door held. The hall beyond it gathered the sound of the storm and did not accuse. The porch room and the hall had rain on its stones, some were above, some seam, some were honest, had let a teaspoon into the right place. The frame stood at its edge, hands out, showing itself empty. A beautiful trick. It did not carry names. It did not carry weather. It carried its own hunger folded up into manners. Ask, the keeper said to it, the way a mother asks for words instead of a tantrum. It tapped the stone. Once. Twice. Thrice. A porch's rhythm. The river under the arch pushed a great, gentle shoulder against its banks and held steady so the hill could think. What do we, the friend began, then stopped because she had learned her mouth could hand over doors by accident. Anchor, Sylvie said. And build. She set the emblem book on the porch stones and drew, with pencil, on a blank page, a simple shape too humble to be a trap for anyone with bad taste. A bucket. Empty. Then a bucket with 2 ladles, hands, beside it. Then a bucket full enough to slosh. The frame leaned. We will carry water, the ant said. We will carry it past your room, not into it. We will carry it to the place where the barn leaks because the men forgot to fix it and the women remembered. The frame did something almost like delight, its inside light quick in a degree. We will not carry it into the kitchen, the keeper said gently to the room, and we will not carry it into the library, and we will not carry it to the copper door. We will carry it to the scene where a teaspoon is allowed. The frame stood back. It had learned to make room. They carried water. Not because they had to. Because the rule desired work to be real. They hauled from the pump, strong arms, tired arms, young, older, and they poured it into the buckets and sloshed it up and over and down to the seam Sylvie had never thought of as a seam, just a trickle under the lowest board. They carried water on purpose into a night that would have stolen it anyway so that the house could say, we admit this, we refuse you, we are strong enough to answer hunger with labor. The storm laughed. It always will. But the house did not shake. When it was done laughing, when the cedars had wrung out their skirts and the roof had bragged itself sleepy and the river had released its held breath in a sigh that ran all the way down the county, the porch room was dry and the frame was standing on 2 stones as if to say politely that it did not want to track mud into anything later. Good, the keeper said. Now we pay the old bill. The friend frowned. What bill? The one from 1918, Sylvie said, and the keeper's eyes, tired, amused, proud, softened. The one the valley has been carrying on its hip like a baby that outgrew diapers but not the habit of being held. We took breath and we bartered with it and we pretended we could keep accounts inside the book without the book writing in us. She looked at the bowl in the round room, at the emblems, at the stone's small notch. We owe. How do we pay? The ant asked. Women whose hands own a kitchen always ask the bill. With work, the keeper said, like the most obvious lesson and the hardest one in the same breath. And with a thing it wants that doesn't cost anyone a name. She lifted her chin to Sylvie. Give it the harp. The jaw harp had been the keeper's, then the friend's, then the keeper's, then none of theirs, only the pitch had counted. Sylvie held it now, cool, occasionally warm, shaped like the mouth of a thing with manners. She set it in the bowl of the round room. The instrument made a tone without being plucked, the tone a spoon makes in a hand when the other hand is cooking and singing. The bowl ate the sound and made it quiet. The frame stood in the hall and did not intrude and did not cheat and did not gossip. It listened like a boy fishing because his grandmother is full of ideas about stillness. You can borrow this, the keeper said to the room, to the frame, to the river. But you cannot take it out of the house. The river made the sound rivers make when they buy something at a fair price. The ledger waited upstairs. The bench inclined its plank. The bell swung a degree and then returned to stillness like a clock that refuses to be a god. They climbed, slow with the kind of exhaustion that does not demand dramatics. The barn received them with a smell of wood warmed by the next day before it even happened. In the ledger, under Sylvie's verbs and the friends and the ants, the keeper wrote, in her hand that had once filled margins with corrections and now crossed out nothing, paid. Then she drew the porch, small, sturdy, ridiculous, perfect. You know it isn't over, the friend said quietly. Not a lament. A readiness. Nothing important ends, the keeper said. It asks for the next right tool. She held the black stone to Sylvie and then to the ant and then to the friend and closed each of their hands around it and opened them again without taking anything but a small, honest weight out of their palms. Tomorrow, the ant said, and almost said sky and didn't. Tomorrow we hang a lamp on the porch. Tomorrow, the friend said, and almost said the name of the day and didn't. Tomorrow we sort the nails by head as well as length. Tomorrow, the keeper said, and did not say anything else, because some tomorrows require only that you arrive with the right verbs and leave your nouns at home. Sylvie closed the ledger. She ran her hand down the plane's cheek and lifted the broom as if it weighed exactly as much as loyalty. She looked at the lid and did not feel the old casual affection for an object she could move when she needed to. She felt, instead, the correct regard a person owes a threshold that has agreed to do its share of the work. There would be days when the frame forgot its manners. There would be men who preferred roads to porches. There would be weather that wanted to be named. There would be mornings when she woke to find her own hand halfway out of bed as if it had been reaching for the cold side in sleep. There would be river. There would be loss, because the valley keeps its books more honestly than people prefer. But there would be rule, too. The good rule, written not in brass or stone but in the work 3 women and an ant did with a broom and a plane and an auger and a jaw harp and a book of emblems, that a house is not a road and a road may stop outside a house and be welcome there until it remembers it has somewhere else to go. She stood on the porch she had drawn on paper and then on wood and then on air, and she listened to the valley breathe like a planet that is not finished choosing her weather, and she felt the black stone in her pocket cool to the exact temperature of whatever the word left means when you haven't got a wall handy. The bell made its small sound, unalarmed, a chime that a hand could wear like a ring without losing blood, and from below, the most marvelous thing, came a matching sound, as if a small bell had learned to ring itself in the library only when the porch was empty and the house desired to be asked. The keeper looked at Sylvie with a pride that did not need to be said. The friend pressed her shoulder without needing to own anything. The ant, smiling without names, poured tea on the bench for anyone who had built enough house that day to deserve to be guests in it. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.